This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but it's been eating at me for months now. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. Hell, I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. I'm a police officer in Pine Hollow. It's one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone, and serious crime is pretty much limited to the occasional DUI or domestic dispute. The kind of place where the biggest excitement is when someone's cow gets loose or teenagers throw toilet paper on the high school principal's house. I've been on the force for 7 years now, and I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain until 3 months ago. It was early October, around 9:30 at night. I was on patrol, finishing up a quiet shift when the call came in. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived on Willow Lane, reported strange lights and noises coming from the abandoned Murdoch house a few doors down from her. Dispatch asked me to check it out. Now, everyone in Pine Hollow knows about the Murdoch house. It's been empty for almost 20 years, ever since old man Murdoch died in his sleep. There've always been rumors about the place. Weird noises, lights turning on and off, figures in the windows, classic small-town ghost stories. I never paid them any mind. There's always that one creepy house in every town, right? When I pulled up to the property, everything looked normal. Well, normal for an abandoned house. The yard was overgrown, paint peeling off the Victorian-style exterior, a few broken windows, nothing out of the ordinary. I figured it was probably just some kids messing around, maybe squatters. I radioed in my position and said I was going to check the perimeter. The front gate creaked as I pushed it open. I remember thinking I should oil it next time I came by. Funny how your mind fixates on normal things when something isn't right, because something definitely wasn't right. I felt it immediately, this pressure in the air, like right before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I shined my flashlight around the yard as I approached the front porch. The wooden steps groaned under my weight. The front door was slightly ajar, which immediately put me on alert. I announced myself. "Police officer, anyone inside?" and waited. Nothing. I pushed the door open wider with my foot, one hand on my gun, the other holding my flashlight. The beam cut through years of dust floating in the air. The house smelled musty, like old paper and mildew, but there was something else, something metallic and cold that made the hair on my neck stand up. The living room was mostly empty except for some broken furniture covered in sheets, and then I saw it. Sitting right in the middle of the floor was an old tape recorder. Not a modern one, but one of those bulky cassette players from the 80s or 90s. It looked clean compared to everything else in the house, like it had been placed there recently. That's when my rational brain should have said, "Call for backup right now." But curiosity got the better of me. I crossed the room, crouched down, and examined the recorder. It had a tape inside, and the play button was up, indicating it had reached the end of whatever was recorded. I pressed rewind, waited for it to stop, then hit play. At first, there was just static. Then a voice, distorted and barely audible, whispered, "Help me." It was followed by what sounded like crying, then more static, and the voice again, "Help me, I'm still here." Then nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Still nothing but white noise. That's when I heard it. A creak from upstairs, like someone stepping on an old floorboard. Then another. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Every instinct told me to get out, but I couldn't just leave if someone was in trouble. That's not what cops do. So I drew my gun and headed for the stairs, calling out again, "Police, identify yourself." The staircase curved up to the second floor, each step protesting under my weight. The temperature seemed to drop with every step I took. By the time I reached the landing, I could see my breath clouding in front of me. It was early October in Pine Hollow, not even close to freezing temperatures outside. The upstairs hallway stretched out before me with 4 doors, 2 on each side, all closed except for the one at the very end, which was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of pale moonlight through. The creaking had stopped, but I could swear I heard breathing, not my own, something else. I moved down the hallway, checking each room. The first 2 were empty, just some old furniture and cobwebs. The third had a child's bedroom set, covered in dust, untouched for years. When I reached the last door, I hesitated. Something told me not to go in there, but I pushed the feeling aside. I nudged the door open with my foot and swept my flashlight across the room. It was a bedroom. Master bedroom, probably. There was an old 4-poster bed against one wall, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and in the corner by the window, a rocking chair. A rocking chair that was moving slowly back and forth, though there was no breeze, no one sitting in it. I froze. The chair continued its rhythmic motion, the wood creaking with each rock. My flashlight beam trembled as my hand shook. I took a step backward, intending to get the hell out of there when the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing the handle. It wouldn't turn. I pulled, pushed, twisted. Nothing. It was like it had been welded shut. "This isn't happening," I said out loud, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. But it was happening. The room had gotten even colder, so cold it hurt to breathe. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the room into darkness, except for the weak moonlight filtering through the dirty window. Then I heard it, whispering, the same voice from the tape, but not coming from a recording this time. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. "Help me. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone." I banged on the door, shouting for help, though I knew no one would hear me. My radio crackled to life, but instead of dispatch, I heard the voice again, closer now, like it was speaking directly into my ear. "You shouldn't have come here, Officer Harper." It knew my name. I turned around slowly, my back pressed against the door. The rocking chair had stopped moving, and in the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, I saw something. A darker patch of darkness, vaguely human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, and where its face should have been, 2 pale blue points of light, like eyes, staring at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. Cold, so cold it burned through my uniform, but when I looked, there was nothing there, just the sensation of fingers gripping my shoulder, tightening. That's when I lost it. Pure adrenaline took over. I threw myself at the door, ramming it with my shoulder once, twice, 3 times until it finally gave way. I stumbled into the hallway and ran. Ran like I've never run before, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling when I reached the bottom. The tape recorder was gone from the living room floor, just gone, like it had never been there. I burst out the front door and didn't stop running until I reached my patrol car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I radioed for backup, and this time it worked perfectly. When my fellow officers arrived 10 minutes later, I was still sitting in my car, trying to get my breathing under control. They found me pale, sweating, with a bruised shoulder from breaking down the door. We searched the house together, all 3 floors, the basement, the attic, nothing, no tape recorder. The rocking chair in the master bedroom was still, covered in dust like everything else, showing no signs of having been used in years. The door I'd broken through showed no damage at all. They all looked at me like I was crazy when I tried to explain what happened. I don't blame them. If one of them had come to me with the same story, I'd have thought they were pulling my leg or needed psychiatric evaluation. The official report says I investigated a noise complaint, found nothing suspicious, and left. My sergeant chalked it up to exhaustion and suggested I take a few days off. I took his advice, but it's not over. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those glowing blue eyes staring back at me. I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that cold hand on my shoulder. Twice now, I've found my ancient tape recorder, the one that's been in my closet for years, sitting on my kitchen table when I wake up in the morning, though I know for a fact I didn't put it there. And the Murdoch house, it's still standing at the end of Willow Lane. Sometimes, driving past on patrol, I see a light flickering in the upstairs window. In that room, like something is waiting. Watching. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, and sometimes when my radio picks up static during the night shift, I hear a whisper beneath the noise. "Come back, Officer Harper. I'm still waiting." I never will, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever's in that house isn't content to wait forever. That someday, if I'm not careful, it might come looking for me instead. Story 2. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night. I've tried to rationalize it for years, but I can't explain it away no matter how hard I try. This happened when I was in college, working at a group home for adults with disabilities in central New Jersey. It wasn't some creepy old building with a dark history or anything, just a normal split-level house in a regular suburban neighborhood built sometime in the 70s. Nothing special about it. The residents were mostly older folks with various developmental disabilities who needed 24/7 care. I usually worked the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. because it fit perfectly with my class schedule. The job was pretty chill most nights. I'd help the residents get ready for bed, do some light cleaning, then basically just be there in case anyone needed help during the night. Most nights, everyone slept through, and I'd just watch TV or do homework. It was early November, just a few days after Halloween. I'd gone to this costume party the weekend before where I dressed as Papa Legba, the voodoo spirit that guards the crossroads between the human and spirit worlds. I had done this elaborate makeup with blacked-out eyes and this intricate skull design. I'd spent hours on YouTube learning how to do it properly, and honestly, it came out looking pretty creepy. I even kept some pictures on my phone to show my co-workers because I was proud of how it turned out. Anyway, this particular night started like any other. I came in for my shift around 11, chatted with the evening staff for a bit while they filled me in on how everyone's day had gone. Nothing unusual. By midnight, all 4 residents were asleep, and I had the rest of the night to myself. The house had this small living room area where we had an old TV hooked up to a Wii console that we used for Netflix. The TV itself was nothing special, just a flat screen mounted on the wall with this thick black border around the screen. The Wii was probably ancient by technology standards, and it glitched out all the time. The screen would freeze, or this loud static noise would blast out of nowhere. It was annoying but normal. After doing my first rounds checking on everyone, I settled into the couch in the living room and decided to watch some Netflix. I remember I was in the middle of binging some crime documentary series, so I fired up the Wii and got comfortable. Here's where things get weird. I was about 40 minutes into watching when the screen suddenly froze and this awful screeching noise blasted from the speakers. I jumped up and rushed to lower the volume, worried it might wake up the residents. Like I said, this happened pretty regularly with the Wii, but I realized something odd. It only ever seemed to happen when I was alone on shift, never when I worked with someone else. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just did what I always did, unplugged the Wii, waited about 30 seconds, and plugged it back in. While I was waiting for it to reboot, I stayed standing in front of the TV, and that's when I noticed something in the reflection on the black border of the screen. At first, I thought it was just my own reflection, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't me at all. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 7 to 10 years old. She had long dark hair with bangs, and she was wearing this white sleeveless nightgown or dress. She was thin, almost too thin, and she was standing in this weird, unnatural position. Her legs were spread slightly apart, her arms curved outward from her body, with her fingers pointed toward her thighs, and her head was tilted down in this really creepy way. But what scared me the most was her eyes. She was looking up at me, leering with this expression I can't even describe. It wasn't childlike at all. It was knowing, malevolent. I completely froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. I just stood there staring at this reflection in the TV, and she stared back at me. Time seemed to stretch on forever. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like minutes. Finally, I managed to turn around to look at where she should have been standing, right behind me in the living room. But there was nothing there, just empty space. I spun around in a complete circle, checking every corner of the room. Nothing. No little girl, no movement, no sound. She was only in the reflection. When I looked back at the TV, the reflection was gone too. Just my own pale, terrified face staring back at me. I immediately turned on every light in the downstairs area. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely flip the switches. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her standing there, but there was nothing. I checked on all the residents. They were still sound asleep, completely undisturbed. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the brightly lit office with my back against the wall, facing the door. I didn't even want to use my phone because I was afraid I might see her reflection in the screen. I just sat there, wide awake, jumping at every little creak or sound until the morning staff arrived at 7. When my co-worker Lisa came in, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, and I almost started crying right then and there. "Something weird happened last night," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. I explained what I'd seen, half expecting her to laugh it off or tell me I'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. But she didn't. Her face went serious, and she sat down across from me. "You're not the first person to see her," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Lisa explained that a guy who used to work the overnight shift about a year before I started had seen the same thing. A little girl with long dark hair in a white dress, only visible in reflections. He'd quit shortly after, refusing to work overnights anymore. He told the manager he'd seen something evil in the house. "Did anyone ever look into it?" I asked. "Like, did something happen to a little girl in this house?" Lisa shook her head. "The house isn't even that old, maybe 50 or 60 years, and as far as we know, no children ever died here. It was built as a single-family home and was only converted to a group home about 15 years ago." "Then what the hell did I see?" I asked. She just shrugged. "No idea. But I've worked here for 8 years, and I've never seen anything during day shifts. It only happens at night, and only to certain people." That didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made it worse, knowing that whatever I saw had targeted me specifically. I didn't quit my job. I needed the money too badly for tuition, but I changed my habits. I never watched Netflix at work again. I kept all the lights on during my entire shift. During those last quiet hours before morning staff arrived, I'd sit in the office with the door open, where I could see down both hallways at once. The weirdest part is that I never saw the girl again, even though I worked there for another 1.5 years, but I always felt like I was being watched. Sometimes the Wii would still glitch out and make that horrible noise, but only when I was alone, never when I worked double shifts with another staff member. A few times, I caught myself avoiding looking at reflective surfaces during my shifts. The darkened windows, the microwave door, even my phone screen when it was turned off. I was terrified of seeing her looking back at me. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was sleep deprivation or my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe working overnight shifts messed with my perception. Maybe I briefly dozed off and dreamed it. But deep down, I know what I saw. The thing that still bothers me the most is the way she was standing. That unnatural pose with her arms curved out and her head tilted down but her eyes looking up. No kid stands like that, and her expression, it wasn't childlike at all. There was something ancient and knowing in those eyes, something that recognized me, even though I'd never seen her before. Sometimes I wonder if it had something to do with my Halloween costume from the days before, like maybe dressing as Papa Legba, a spirit associated with the crossroads between worlds, somehow opened a door that should have stayed closed. But that sounds crazy, even to me. It's been 6 years since that night, and I still can't explain what happened. All I know is that for a few terrifying moments, I saw something that shouldn't exist, something that was watching me from a place where it shouldn't be able to watch from. I don't work at that group home anymore, but sometimes I wonder if she's still there. waiting for someone else to notice her reflection in the dark screen of a TV late at night when everyone else is asleep. Story 3. I've been carrying this story for years, and it still sends chills through me every time I think about it. It happened to my mother about 25 years ago in Zacatecas, Mexico, where I grew up. She only told me about it once when I was a teenager, and I could see the fear in her eyes was still raw, like she was reliving it as she spoke. I've never forgotten a single detail. Our town in Zacatecas was small and tight-knit, where everyone knew each other's business. The summers were brutally hot and humid, and my mother had a habit of taking evening walks to cool off after dinner. She'd been doing it for years, nothing unusual about it. I remember she'd always leave around 7 in the evening and be back before it got completely dark. It was her time to herself, away from the chaos of raising 4 kids in a small house. That particular day had been especially hot, the kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin and turns the inside of your house into an oven. My father was working late at the auto shop, and my older siblings were out with friends. I was at my cousin's house for a sleepover. My mother had the house to herself, which was rare, so after washing the dishes, she decided to take her usual walk. She told me she left the house around 7:30, a bit later than usual. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. She walked through town, greeting neighbors sitting on their porches, trying to catch the evening breeze. Her route usually took her to the edge of town, along a dirt path that curved around a small lake about half a mile from the last houses. This lake wasn't anything special, more like a large pond with some cattails and rocks surrounding it. Kids sometimes fished there during the day, but by evening, it was usually deserted. That's why she liked walking there, the quiet and the slight coolness that came off the water. She said she was about halfway around the lake when she first heard it, a woman crying. At first, she thought maybe someone was hurt and needed help. The sound came from further ahead, around a bend in the path where some scrubby trees blocked the view. My mother hesitated but decided to check if someone needed assistance. She said the crying was odd though, not like normal sobbing but more melodic, almost like someone was singing through their tears. Something about it made the hair on her arms stand up, but she kept walking. As she rounded the bend, she saw a woman standing near the water's edge, her back to the path. My mother stopped in her tracks. The woman was wearing a long white dress that seemed to glow slightly in the fading light. Her hair was black and hung down to her waist, wet and stringy like she'd just come out of the water. "Está bien? ¿Necesita ayuda?" My mother called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't turn around but continued crying. My mother took a few cautious steps closer, and that's when she heard what the woman was saying between sobs. "Mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos? My children, where are my children?" My mother froze. Those words, that white dress, the long black hair, the lake. Every Mexican child grows up hearing the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, one of the most terrifying figures in our folklore, a beautiful but poor woman who married a wealthy man, only to discover he was having an affair. In her rage and grief, she drowned their children in a lake because they resembled their father. When she realized what she'd done, she died of sorrow and was condemned to wander near bodies of water for eternity, crying for her lost children. My mother said in that moment, her blood turned to ice. She knew exactly what or who she was looking at. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Then, slowly, the figure began to turn around. My mother described how time seemed to slow down. The woman's white dress didn't move naturally. It swayed as if underwater, and as she turned, my mother could see that her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering a few inches above it. The face that finally turned toward my mother was both beautiful and horrifying. The woman's skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to be leaking black tears. Her mouth was open in a perpetual wail, but now the sound was coming directly into my mother's head rather than through her ears. "Tú tienes hijos," the figure said, her voice somehow both a whisper and a scream. "You have children." That broke my mother's paralysis. She turned and ran faster than she had ever run in her life. The dirt path blurred beneath her feet as she sprinted away from the lake, not daring to look back. She could hear the wailing growing louder behind her, as if La Llorona was following. The worst part, my mother told me, was that as she ran, she could hear splashing water, like someone was walking through the lake, even though the lake was now far behind her. The sound seemed to be all around her, as if the lake itself was following her home. She didn't stop running until she reached the first houses of town. Only then did she dare to look back. There was nothing behind her on the path, but in the distance, near where the lake would be, she could see a faint white figure standing still, watching her. My mother practically fell through our front door, locking it behind her and then checking all the windows and other doors. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone to call my father at work. When he came home, he found her sitting in the kitchen with all the lights on, clutching her rosary and a kitchen knife. She made him drive to pick me up from my cousin's house that night, even though I was supposed to stay over. For weeks afterward, she wouldn't let any of us out after dark. She never took her evening walks again. What makes this even more chilling is what happened in our town over the next few days. A boy from the neighborhood went missing, last seen playing near that same lake. They found him 3 days later, alive but terrified, wandering in the hills miles away from town. He couldn't explain how he got there or what had happened. He would only say that a sad lady in white had tried to take him to find her children. And here's something I've never told anyone before. The night my mother saw La Llorona, I woke up at my cousin's house to the sound of a woman crying outside the window. I thought it was just a neighbor or something and went back to sleep. But now, looking back, it was around the exact same time my mother had her encounter, like somehow La Llorona knew where my mother's children were. My mother is a practical woman, not given to superstition despite growing up in a culture rich with legends and ghost stories. For her to be so deeply affected, I know what she saw was real. To this day, she crosses herself whenever we drive past that lake. She's never again spoken about what happened in detail, just that one time she told me the story. I'm now a mother myself, living in a different city, but I've never forgotten what happened. Sometimes when I'm putting my daughter to bed, I'll hear a sound outside that makes me freeze. The wind in the trees that sounds almost like a woman weeping. In those moments, I remember my mother's face as she told me about La Llorona, and I hold my daughter a little closer. Last year, I went back to visit my parents in Zacatecas. That lake is still there, though the town has grown around it now. One evening, my mother caught me looking out the window toward where the lake would be. She put her hand on my shoulder and said simply, "Never go there after dark. She's still there. She's always there." I believe her. Some things can't be explained away, especially when you see the lingering fear in the eyes of someone you trust completely. That lake in Zacatecas holds a secret that science and reason can't touch, a grief so powerful it transcends death itself. To this day, whenever I hear crying in the distance, especially near water, my heart stops for a moment, because once La Llorona notices you, once she knows you have children of your own, they say she never truly leaves you alone. Story 4. I still check my back seat before I get in my car, every single time. It's been almost 4 years since it happened, but I can't stop. My roommates think I'm just being paranoid after watching too many true crime documentaries, but they don't know the real reason. I've never told anyone the full story until now. It was mid-October, right after midterms week at Willowbrook College. I was completely burned out from pulling 3 all-nighters in a row studying for my biology and psychology exams. That Friday night, everyone in my dorm was celebrating the end of midterms with parties, but I couldn't handle being around people. My brain felt like mush, and I just needed some space to decompress. Around 11 at night, I decided to take a drive to clear my head. It's something I've always done when I'm stressed. Just me, some music, and the open road. Willowbrook is surrounded by these beautiful winding rural roads, and at night they're practically empty. The fall air was crisp, and there was this perfect full moon that made everything glow silver. I remember I was listening to my chill drive playlist and had the windows cracked despite the cold. The smell of fallen leaves and pine trees filled my car. For the first time that week, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't paying much attention to where I was going, just following whatever roads looked interesting, taking random turns when I felt like it. I'd been driving for maybe 45 minutes when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the road where the forest opened up to a small clearing. At first, I almost didn't stop. It was nearly midnight by then, and who hitchhikes that late? But something about her made me slow down. She was young, maybe my age or a little older, with this long, dark hair that seemed to float around her shoulders in the breeze. She was only wearing a thin jacket despite the cold, and she had her thumb out. I don't know why I stopped. I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers. My dad drilled that into me since I got my license, but I found myself pulling over. When I rolled down my window, she leaned down and smiled at me. Her face was pretty in this delicate way, but there was something off about her eyes. They seemed too deep, like they had seen too much. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite my nerves. "Yes, thank you," she said in this soft voice. "I'm trying to get home. I haven't been there in a very long time." She got in my passenger seat, bringing with her this weird smell, like old perfume mixed with something earthy, not unpleasant, just old-fashioned. She didn't have a purse or any belongings with her, which I thought was strange. "I'm Emily," I said, trying to be friendly. "Sarah," she replied, looking out the window rather than at me. "I live just a few miles from here. I can show you the way." I put the car in drive, and Sarah started giving me directions. Each turn took us deeper into the countryside, onto roads I'd never seen before. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel, and the trees grew thicker around us. My GPS signal dropped, and I started getting nervous about finding my way back to campus. "Just a little further," Sarah kept saying whenever I'd ask how much longer. "It's been so long since I've been home." After about 20 minutes of increasingly narrow roads, she suddenly pointed to a gap between the trees. "There. Turn there." I almost missed it. It was barely a driveway, overgrown with weeds and branches that scraped against my car as I turned in. The headlights illuminated a path that wound through the trees for about 100 yards before opening up to reveal an old house, and I mean old. It was a 2-story farmhouse style with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. In the moonlight, it looked abandoned. Several windows were boarded up, and part of the roof appeared to have collapsed on one side. There were no lights on, no car in the driveway, no sign anyone had lived there for years. "This is your house?" I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. Sarah was staring at it with this intense expression. "Yes, home." She turned to me with that same strange smile. "Thank you for bringing me back. I've been trying to get here for so long." Before I could respond, she was out of the car and walking toward the house. I watched as she crossed the overgrown yard, her figure illuminated by my headlights and the moonlight. When she reached the porch steps, she turned back once to wave, then seemed to disappear into the shadows of the doorway. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, completely confused. Who would live in that decrepit place, and why would she be going into a dark house with no lights? Should I wait to make sure she got in okay? The whole situation felt wrong. After a few minutes, I decided to leave. I carefully backed out of the narrow driveway and headed back the way we came, trying to remember the turns we'd taken. But something kept nagging at me. The condition of the house, the lack of any lights or signs of habitation, the way Sarah had just vanished into the darkness. About halfway back to the main road, I made a decision I still regret. I turned around. I told myself I was just being a good person, making sure this girl was safe. Maybe she needed help but was too proud to ask. Maybe there was no electricity in the house. Maybe I was overthinking everything because I was tired from midterms. When I pulled back into the driveway, the house looked even worse than before. My headlights swept across the front, revealing broken windows I hadn't noticed earlier. The front door was hanging partially open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I turned off the engine but left the headlights on, pointing at the house. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, but of course there was no service out here. I hesitated for a long moment before finally getting out of the car. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Are you okay in there?" No response, just the creaking of the house as the wind pushed against its weathered boards. I climbed the porch steps carefully, wincing at each groan of the wood beneath my feet. The front door opened with a long, pained squeal when I pushed it. "Hello? Sarah?" I called again, shining my phone light into the darkness. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned house. Dust covered everything, cobwebs stretched across corners and doorways. The furniture that remained was rotted and falling apart. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. I moved slowly through what must have been the living room, my light catching on broken picture frames and tattered curtains. There was no sign anyone had been there in years, let alone minutes ago. "Sarah?" I tried once more, panic starting to rise in my chest. Had I imagined her? Was I so sleep-deprived that I'd hallucinated a whole person? As I turned to leave, my light caught on something on the mantel of the fireplace, a photograph still in its frame, somehow less dusty than everything else. I moved closer and felt my blood freeze. It was a black and white photo of a family standing in front of the house, but the house in the picture was new, with fresh paint and a well-kept yard. There were 4 people, a man, a woman, a young boy, and a teenage girl. The girl was Sarah, same delicate features, same long dark hair, but the clothes they were wearing looked like they were from the 1950s or 60s. I grabbed the photo with shaking hands, wiping away more dust from the glass. There was a date written in the corner, June 1962. I dropped the photo and ran. I didn't care about the creaking floorboards or the rotting porch steps that nearly gave way beneath me. I just needed to get back to my car. When I reached it, I yanked open the driver's door and threw myself inside, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I looked up to turn on the car, I saw movement in my rearview mirror. Sarah was sitting in my back seat. I screamed and whipped around, but the back seat was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, she was there again, smiling that same strange smile, but her skin was different now, pale and almost translucent in the moonlight filtering through the windows. "Thank you for bringing me home," she whispered, her voice sounding like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I've been waiting so long." I twisted around again, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, it showed only the empty back seat. I don't remember the drive back to campus. I just remember driving and driving, taking any turn that seemed to lead toward civilization, constantly checking my rearview mirror and the back seat. I didn't stop until I reached the brightly lit parking lot of a 24-hour gas station near campus, where I sat hyperventilating for what felt like hours. I've never gone back to that road. I've tried to find information about the house or about a girl named Sarah who might have lived there, but with no address and only vague memories of how to get there, I haven't found anything concrete. But sometimes, especially on windy fall nights when the moon is full, I swear I can hear a whisper in my ear when I'm alone in my car, a soft "thank you" that makes the hair on my arms stand up. I still don't know what happened that night. Was Sarah a ghost? A hallucination from my sleep-deprived brain? Sometimes I almost convince myself I made the whole thing up, but then I'll catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror that shouldn't be there, just for a split second. And I know she's still with me, still grateful I brought her home, and I wonder if she'll ever truly leave, or if part of her will always be looking for another ride. Story 5? I've been driving trucks for 15 years now, 15 goddamn years of highways, rest stops, and midnight runs. You get used to the solitude, even start to like it. But what happened 3 nights ago? I still can't sleep, still can't close my eyes without seeing those empty sockets staring back at me. It was supposed to be a routine haul from Dallas to San Diego. I've done that route maybe 100 times before. Nothing special about it, just another long night on the road. I had a full load of electronics, TVs, gaming consoles, the usual stuff, worth a pretty penny, which is why I prefer driving at night. Less traffic, less chance of highway robbery. The sun had set hours ago, and I was crossing through that empty stretch of West Texas desert. You know the kind. Miles of nothing but scrub brush and darkness, where your headlights only catch the occasional reflective eyes of some critter before they vanish back into the black. The radio had gone static about an hour back, so I was humming to myself, trying to stay alert. My dashboard clock read 2:13 in the morning when I first noticed the lights in my mirror, red and blue flashing rhythmically behind me. My stomach dropped immediately. I wasn't speeding. I'd checked my logbook twice before starting the haul. All my paperwork was in order. I couldn't figure what this could be about, but I did what any driver does. I signaled and pulled over onto the shoulder. The cruiser stopped about 20 feet behind me. Standard procedure, right? But something felt off from the start. The lights kept flashing, but nobody got out for almost a full minute. I watched in my side mirror, feeling this weird tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. When the door finally opened, I expected to see the beam of a flashlight, but there was nothing, just a tall figure moving toward my truck. I rolled down my window and got my license ready. The night air hit me like ice water, way colder than it should have been for Texas, even in the dead of night. "Evening, officer," I said, trying to sound casual. "What seems to be the problem?" Nothing, no response, just this presence standing beside my door. He was tall, taller than any cop I'd ever seen. His uniform looked right at first glance, but something about it wasn't quite normal. It seemed to absorb the light from my cab rather than reflect it, and his face. I couldn't make out his features beneath the brim of his hat, just shadows where a face should be. His hand was resting on his holstered gun, not gripping it, just touching it, like a reminder. "Sir, my license and registration." I started again. "Exit the vehicle." His voice, Jesus, it was wrong, flat. No inflection, like someone who'd heard human speech but never actually spoken before. "Can I ask what this is about?" My mouth had gone bone dry. "Exit the vehicle." Each word precisely the same tone as the last. That's when he reached for my arm. His hand shot through the window and grabbed my wrist with this impossible strength. His skin felt like ice, like touching a corpse that had been left out in winter. And when he leaned in, that's when I saw it. Under the hat brim, where eyes should have been, there was only darkness. Not shadow, not dark eyes, just two hollow voids that seemed to go on forever. I'm not ashamed to say I screamed. Pure instinct took over, and I yanked my arm back with everything I had. His grip was insanely strong, but somehow my hand slipped free. I slammed the window shut and stomped on the gas before I could even think. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder before catching the asphalt. In my mirror, I could see him standing exactly where I'd left him, not running back to his cruiser, not drawing his weapon, just watching my truck pull away, that featureless face turned toward me. I was doing 90 down that empty highway, hands shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. What the fuck had just happened? Was I hallucinating from exhaustion? I'd been driving all day, but I wasn't that tired. I've done longer hauls without seeing shit like that. The radio that had been dead for hours suddenly crackled to life, making me jump so hard I nearly swerved off the road. "You can't run." The voice came through the static, deep and distorted. "You can't hide. Dead men tell no tales." I punched the power button, but the voice continued. "The highway is long, but the night is longer, John." It knew my name. How the fuck did it know my name? I ripped the wires out of the radio completely, and the cab fell silent except for my own ragged breathing and the rumble of the engine. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I needed to find somewhere with people, with lights, somewhere safe. About 20 minutes later, I spotted a sign for a rest stop, and I nearly cried with relief. There was a flickering neon "Open 24 hours" sign visible from the highway. Not many cars in the lot, but at that point, I didn't care. Any human contact would do. I pulled in and parked my rig, but sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see those red and blue lights following me in. Nothing came down the highway behind me, just empty darkness. The rest stop looked old, one of those independent places with a small convenience store and diner attached. the kind that's been around since the 70s and never updated. Only one light was on inside, casting this sickly yellow glow through the windows. Better than nothing, I figured. I locked my truck and practically ran to the entrance. The door chimed when I pushed it open, but nobody came to greet me. The place was empty. No customers, no staff behind the counter, just rows of snacks and drinks, a couple of booths by the window, and a bathroom sign at the back. "Hello?" My voice echoed off the linoleum. "Anybody working tonight?" Nothing. I went straight for the payphone I'd spotted by the restrooms. I needed to call the state police, report what had happened. I picked up the receiver. Dead. No dial tone. I tried the store phone behind the counter. Same thing. My cell showed no service, not even a single bar. That's when I heard the door chime again. I spun around, hoping to see some late-night employee coming in from a smoke break. Instead, I saw that same tall figure silhouetted against the darkness outside. The hat, the uniform, that empty face. "The road is mine," it said, taking a step inside. "Your soul is mine." I backed away, knocking over a display of chips. "What the fuck are you? What do you want?" It didn't answer, just kept coming, moving with this unnatural smoothness, like it was gliding rather than walking. I turned and ran for the back door, shouldering it open and bursting into the night air. I expected to find myself behind the rest stop, maybe near a dumpster or employee parking lot. Instead, I was standing in the middle of the highway. The same highway I'd been driving on. The rest stop was gone. My truck was gone. There was nothing around me but empty desert and asphalt stretching into blackness. I stood there, frozen in confusion and terror, when I saw them. Headlights in the distance coming straight toward me. Not normal headlights. They were too bright, too white, like twin suns bearing down on me, and they were moving fast, impossibly fast. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work right. It was like moving through molasses. The roar of the engine got louder, the screeching of tires on asphalt like some animal's cry. Those lights were blinding me now, taking up my entire field of vision. The last thing I remember was the impact, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't pain, it was cold, a cold that went straight through to my bones, to my soul. Then darkness. I woke up in my truck, parked at a rest stop 200 miles from where I'd been pulled over. The sun was just coming up. My logbook showed I'd been driving all night without stopping, which is impossible. I had no memory of the drive. There's a bruise on my wrist, exactly where that thing grabbed me. It's black, not purple or blue. Black like nothing I've ever seen before, and it's cold to the touch, always cold. I finished my delivery in San Diego yesterday, told my dispatcher I'm taking some personal time. I don't know if I'm ever getting back on the road, especially not at night. But here's the thing that's really eating at me. When I checked my dash cam to see if I could make sense of what happened, the footage showed me driving normally all night, except for one frame, just one single frame at exactly 2:13 in the morning, where you can clearly see a figure standing in the middle of the road, tall, in uniform, with nothing but darkness where its face should be. I don't know what happened to me out there. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted, but I know it's still out there, waiting on some empty stretch of highway for the next driver who's all alone in the dark. And sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, I swear I can hear the radio static and that voice whispering, "Dead men tell no tales." Story 6. I've been putting off writing this for weeks now, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I need someone else to know what happened, even if no one believes me. I've always been skeptical about the supernatural stuff that's so common here in my country. Yeah, I'd hear the stories from my grandma about witches and curses, but I never took any of it seriously. I mean, I'm 25, I went to university, I consider myself pretty rational, or at least I did until last month. It started on a Saturday when I was out mountain biking on a trail about 30 minutes from my neighborhood. I've been riding these mountains for years, but somehow I'd never noticed this particular ravine before. It was weird. I must have passed by it dozens of times, but that day it just caught my attention. The moment I spotted it, something felt off. The ravine wasn't particularly deep, maybe 15 meters at most, but what struck me was how different it looked from everything around it. All the surrounding area was lush and green, It's the rainy season right now, but the trees in the ravine were completely bare, not just leafless, but twisted in these unnatural angles like they'd been frozen while writhing in pain. They looked dead, but not like they'd died recently. More like they'd been dead for centuries, but somehow were still standing. I stopped my bike and just stared for a while. I couldn't explain why, but I had this urge to go down there to explore it. At the same time, something in the back of my mind was screaming at me to leave. I compromised by taking a few photos on my phone and making a mental note to come back later, maybe with someone else. That evening, I showed the photos to my friend Victor when he came over to watch the football match. He's always been into weird stuff, conspiracy theories, paranormal phenomena, all that. He immediately wanted to check it out. Bro, we have to go there tomorrow evening after I finish work. Those trees aren't natural. I should have said no. I wish I had. But I agreed. The next day, we parked my car at the trailhead around 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, but it would be setting in a couple hours. We brought flashlights just in case, but we weren't planning to stay that long. It was just curiosity, you know? Just two guys checking out a weird spot in the woods. The hike to the ravine took about 20 minutes. Victor was excited the whole way, talking about how certain places can have energy or whatever. I was just laughing it off, telling him he watches too many horror movies. When we got to the edge of the ravine, Victor immediately stopped talking. I noticed it too. It was completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just dead silence. In a tropical forest like ours, that's not normal. There's always noise. Should we go down? I asked, already knowing the answer. Hell yeah, Victor said, but his voice had lost that excited edge. The descent wasn't difficult, it wasn't steep, just a gradual slope. But with each step we took, I felt heavier. Not tired exactly, but like something was pushing down on my shoulders, squeezing my chest. I glanced at Victor and saw him rolling his shoulders uncomfortably. He felt it too. You feeling that? He whispered. I nodded. Like something's pressing on us? Yeah, and watching us. I hadn't put that sensation into words yet, but the moment he said it, I knew he was right. It felt like we were being observed from all directions at once. We kept going, walking between those twisted dead trees. Up close, they were even more disturbing. The bark was blackened in places, as if they'd been partially burned, but it wasn't regular fire damage. More like, I don't know how to describe it, like the darkness was coming from inside the trees. We'd gone maybe 50 meters into the ravine when Victor grabbed my arm. We need to leave, he said, his voice tight. Now. I didn't argue. The pressure was getting worse, and I was starting to feel nauseous. My heart was racing, even though we weren't moving fast. Something was very wrong. We turned around and headed back up the slope. Neither of us spoke until we reached the top. The moment we stepped out of the ravine, it was like crossing an invisible barrier. The weight lifted, and I could hear birds again. Victor and I looked at each other, both breathing hard. What the hell was that? I asked. Victor shook his head. I don't know, but I don't like it. There's something bad there, Gabriel. Really bad. We talked about it the whole way back to the car, trying to rationalize what we'd felt. Maybe it was some kind of natural gas pocket or a weird atmospheric pressure thing. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever it wasn't natural. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the ravine, those twisted trees, that crushing sensation. Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted off. The dream started immediately. I was back at the ravine, but I was alone this time. It was night, and I only had a dim flashlight that barely cut through the darkness. In the dream, I knew I shouldn't go down into the ravine, but my body moved on its own, like I was watching myself from the outside. The descent felt the same as it had in real life. That heaviness, that sense of being watched. But this time I kept going deeper than Victor and I had ventured. The trees seemed to lean toward me as I passed, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I came to a small clearing in the center of the ravine. The ground there was bare dirt. No grass, no plants, nothing. Just packed earth that looked darker than it should have, even in the low light. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the far edge of the clearing. a woman in a white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Her back was to me, and her long black hair hung down to her waist. I remember thinking that I should call out to her, ask if she was okay, but my voice wouldn't work. Slowly, she turned around. Her face, God, her face. It wasn't a human face. It looked like a porcelain doll, perfectly smooth, perfectly white, with painted red lips and empty black eyes. No expression at all, just watching me. I tried to run, but I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, frozen in place as she began to float toward me. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She moved smoothly, gliding across the clearing until she was right in front of me. Up close, her skin didn't look like porcelain anymore. It looked like wax, like something that had been molded to look human but wasn't quite right. She raised her hand and extended her thumb. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was completely helpless as she pressed her thumb against the center of my forehead. The sensation was indescribable, like ice and fire at the same time, a cold burning that radiated outward from where she touched me. And as she held her thumb there, her face began to change. The wax-like skin started to rot away, revealing glimpses of a skull beneath. But the most terrifying part was that as her face decayed, she started to smile, not a normal smile, her lips pulled back too far, revealing blackened gums and yellow teeth. That's when I woke up, gasping for air, my whole body shaking with cold sweat. The pain in my forehead was still there, a dull, throbbing ache exactly where she had touched me in the dream. I stumbled to the bathroom and flipped on the light. There was a mark on my forehead, a small reddish-purple bruise right in the center, exactly where her thumb had been. I touched it gently and it hurt, a real physical pain, not something lingering from the dream. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up in bed, lights on, too terrified to close my eyes. I kept touching the mark, watching it in the mirror, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe I'd bumped my head earlier and hadn't noticed. But I knew better. Whatever had happened in that dream, it had been real somehow. The next morning, I called Victor. I didn't tell him about the dream or the mark. I just said I wanted to go back to the ravine. He thought I was crazy. No way, man. That place is bad news. I haven't slept right since we were there. I need to understand what's happening, I told him. I'm going back today, in daylight. It'll be safer. He refused to come with me, and I didn't blame him. Part of me was screaming not to go back either, but I felt compelled, like I didn't have a choice. The mark on my forehead was throbbing, pulling me toward the ravine. I went alone, arriving around noon when the sun was directly overhead. The ravine looked different in the bright daylight, less menacing but still wrong somehow. The twisted trees cast strange shadows that seemed to move, even when there was no wind. The heaviness was still there as I descended, but it wasn't as overwhelming as before. I pushed through it, heading toward where I'd seen the clearing in my dream. I told myself it was just a dream, that there wouldn't actually be a clearing there. But there was. It was exactly as I'd seen it. A circular area of bare earth surrounded by those twisted trees. And in the center of the clearing was something I hadn't seen in my dream, a crude altar made of stacked rocks. Around the altar were the unmistakable signs of witchcraft, the kind my grandmother used to warn me about. There were chicken heads arranged in a circle, dried blood splattered on the rocks, empty bottles of cheap whiskey, cigarette butts and scraps of burnt paper with writing I couldn't make out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was real. Someone, or something, was using this place for rituals. And somehow, I'd been marked by whatever they were working with. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of utter despair. It crashed over me like a wave, making me drop to my knees. I felt like I would never be happy again, like all hope had been drained from the world. And through my tears, I swear, I saw something moving between the trees. A flash of white, a glimpse of long black hair. I ran. I scrambled up the slope, tripping and falling, scraping my hands and knees but never stopping. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to the nearest church. I'm not even religious, but I felt like I needed to be somewhere sacred, somewhere protected. I texted Victor from the church parking lot. Found a witch altar in the ravine. Get holy water. Not joking. That was 3 weeks ago. The mark on my forehead faded after about 5 days, but I still feel different. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her in reflective surfaces, just for a split second before she's gone. I've been sleeping with the lights on. Victor convinced me to see a curandera, a traditional healer, who performed a cleansing ritual and gave me a protective charm to wear. I don't know if it's helping. I haven't gone back to the ravine, and I never will. But sometimes, especially when I'm about to fall asleep, I feel a cold pressure on my forehead, right where she touched me, and I know she's not done with me yet. Story 7. I still can't sleep with the bathroom door open. Even after 20 years, I keep it firmly shut. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard that same giggle coming from above me. My therapist says it's just an echo of childhood trauma, but she doesn't understand. She wasn't there. I was 7 years old when we moved into that converted button factory in Riverdale, Pennsylvania. My mom had just gotten divorced, and the apartment was all we could afford. The building itself was ancient, built sometime in the early 1900s, with those thick brick walls and giant windows. From the outside it looked kind of cool, but inside, that place had a heaviness to it that I can't really explain. Our apartment was on the first floor, tucked into the corner of the building. It wasn't much, just a living room, kitchen, my mom's bedroom, and my tiny room in the back corner. The bathroom was directly across from my bedroom, one of those old-fashioned ones with a corner shower and this cheap foam tile ceiling that had yellowed with age. I hated that bathroom from day one. During the day it was fine, but at night, with no windows, it became this black void across from my bed. My mom always left my door open a crack so I wouldn't feel too isolated, but that just meant I had a perfect view of that darkness all night long. The worst part was the constant noise. Being in the corner of the building, we got all the creaks and groans as the old place settled. Our landlord said it was normal for a building that old, but to a 7-year-old kid trying to sleep, it was terrifying. It had been about 3 months since we moved in when it happened. It was a Tuesday night in October, I remember, because I'd just started 2nd grade and had a spelling test the next day. I couldn't sleep, partly from test anxiety, partly because the building seemed extra noisy that night. I was lying there staring at the ceiling, listening to the usual creaks when I first noticed it. The sounds were different, not the normal settling noises I'd gotten used to. These were more deliberate, scratching, skittering sounds that moved across the ceiling above me and then into the bathroom. At first I told myself it was just mice or rats. The landlord had mentioned they sometimes got into the walls of old buildings like this, but these sounds were too substantial, too purposeful. I lay completely still, my blanket pulled up to my chin, eyes fixed on the dark bathroom doorway. The scratching continued, moving around above the bathroom ceiling in what sounded like circles. Then it stopped, right above the shower area, and that's when I heard it. A giggle, a quiet, childlike laugh that was barely audible, but definitely there. It sounded like a little boy, maybe around my age, and it had this playfulness to it that made my blood run cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even blink. I just lay there, paralyzed, as tears started streaming down my face. I knew there were no young boys living in our building. The apartments around us were occupied by an elderly couple and a middle-aged woman who lived alone. The giggle came again, a little louder this time, like whatever was up there knew I was listening and was enjoying my fear. The worst part, it felt directed at me. Like whatever was up there was specifically trying to get my attention, mocking me. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that. It felt like hours, just staring into the darkness and crying silently until my mom woke up for her early shift and found me. "Timmy, what's wrong, honey?" she asked, rushing to my bed. I couldn't even speak, just pointed at the bathroom. She turned on all the lights and checked everywhere, but of course found nothing. That night I slept in her bed, and in the morning light the whole thing seemed like a bad dream until I went to use the bathroom. The The ceiling tile above the shower had been moved. Not fallen, moved. Pushed aside deliberately, revealing a gap into the dark space above. I called my mom in, and she stood there, staring up at it with this expression I'll never forget. Confusion mixed with the beginning of real fear. The ceiling space was about 3 feet high, running the entire length of the building above all the apartments. It was pitch black in there, impossible to see anything, but I knew, we both knew, that's where the sounds had come from. Mom immediately called our landlord, who came by that afternoon. He brought a ladder and poked his head up into the opening, shining a flashlight around. I stood in the doorway, refusing to go any closer. "Nothing up here," he said after a few minutes. "Just dust and old pipes. Probably the wind moved the tile." My mom frowned. "Wind? The bathroom doesn't even have a window, and how would wind push a ceiling tile sideways?" He shrugged, replacing the tile. "Buildings this old, they develop their own circulation. Air gets trapped, pressure builds up, could pop a tile loose." It was complete nonsense, and I could tell my mom didn't believe him either. But what could we do? We couldn't afford to move again so soon, and there was no proof of anything dangerous. That night, I begged to sleep in my mom's room again, but she was firm. I needed to face my fears. She checked my room thoroughly, left all the hallway lights on, and promised to leave her door open so she could hear me if I called. None of it helped. I lay there, wide awake, staring at that bathroom ceiling. The scratching started earlier this time, around 9:30. The same pattern, skittering across my ceiling, into the bathroom, circling above the shower. I pulled my blanket over my head and tried to block it out, but then I heard the tile move. The scraping sound of it being pushed aside was unmistakable. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just lay there, shaking, waiting for that giggle. It didn't come, but something worse happened. The skittering sounds moved to the edge of the ceiling opening, like whatever was up there was peering down into the bathroom. I must have fallen asleep eventually from pure exhaustion. In the morning, sure enough, the tile was moved again, showing that same black gap. This became our new normal. Every morning, I'd find that same tile moved. Mom or I would push it back into place, and by the next morning, it would be shifted again. We tried taping it, but the tape would be torn by morning. We tried weighing it down with a broomstick wedged against it, but somehow it still moved. The scratching continued every night, always followed by the sound of the tile moving. The giggling was less frequent, but happened just often enough to remind me that whatever was up there was playful, and that was somehow worse than if it had been openly aggressive. I started developing strategies to cope. I showered only when my mom was home, always with the bathroom door wide open and never looking up. I began sleeping with my bedroom door firmly shut, a towel stuffed at the bottom to block any light or sound. I had nightmares constantly. Dreams of small pale hands reaching down from that ceiling gap, of a face I could never quite see peering at me. My mom tried to get the landlord to investigate more thoroughly, but he refused, insisting there was nothing up there. She couldn't afford an exterminator or private investigator on her own. Eventually, we just lived with it. What else could we do? The scratching, the moved tile, the occasional giggle. It became background noise to our lives, albeit terrifying background noise. My grades started slipping. I developed insomnia. My mom was worried sick about me, but was trapped by our financial situation. The worst incident happened about 6 months after it all started. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. I'd been holding it for hours, afraid to cross the hallway, but I couldn't wait any longer. I crept out of my room, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look up as I used the toilet. As I washed my hands, I heard it, that same childlike giggle, but louder than ever before, directly above me. My head snapped up involuntarily, and the ceiling tile was not just moved, it was gone completely. Just a black square opening into that crawl space. And there, just at the edge of the darkness, I swear I saw the outline of a small hand gripping the edge of the opening. Not an adult hand, a child's hand. pale, thin fingers curled over the edge of the ceiling panel. I ran. I didn't scream, didn't call for my mum, just ran straight to my room, slammed the door, and pushed my small dresser against it. I stayed huddled in the corner of my bed until morning, when my mum found me and the missing ceiling tile on the bathroom floor. That was the breaking point. Mom went to the building manager and demanded to be moved to another apartment in the complex. By some miracle, a unit had just opened up on the 3rd floor, on the opposite side of the building. We moved the following weekend. The new apartment was peaceful. No scratching, no moved tiles, no giggles. Whatever had been in that crawl space either couldn't or wouldn't follow us there. I started sleeping again, my grades improved, and life slowly returned to normal. We lived in that building for 3 more years before moving to another town entirely. In all that time, I never heard another unexplained sound or saw another moved ceiling tile. But sometimes, when I'd pass by our old apartment, I'd look up at that corner of the building and wonder if the new tenants were experiencing the same thing. I'm 27 now, living in my own place hundreds of miles from Riverdale. I've tried researching the history of that button factory, looking for stories of accidents or deaths involving children, but found nothing conclusive. The building was converted to apartments in the 1980s, and records before that are spotty at best. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if it was just the overactive mind of an anxious child in a new place after his parents' divorce. But then I remember that hand gripping the edge of the ceiling panel, those thin, pale fingers curled over the edge, and I know it was real. I still can't sleep with the bathroom door open. I still check my ceiling tiles regularly, and I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I've just heard the echo of a child's giggle from somewhere above me. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about what happened that day in 2002. I was 12 years old, riding the bus home from middle school like I did every afternoon. It was early October, I think. The weather was just starting to cool down, and I remember wearing a light jacket for the first time that fall. I always sat on the right side of the bus, about halfway back. I liked watching the cars pass by on the opposite side of the boulevard. It was just something I did to pass the time on the 20-minute ride home. I had ADHD and took Ritalin back then, but by the afternoon, it was usually wearing off. I wasn't bouncing off the walls or anything, but I could definitely feel the medicine tapering down in my system. Still, I was completely alert and aware of my surroundings. The bus was pretty noisy that day. A bunch of 8th graders in the back were throwing paper and shouting about some TV show from the night before. I was trying to tune them out by focusing on the passing cars. Red sedan, blue pickup truck, white delivery van, just counting them in my head, noting their colors, nothing special. Then I saw it, a small SUV. I think it was a Honda CR-V or maybe a Toyota RAV4, something like that, dark green. It wasn't speeding or driving erratically, just cruising along like any other car, except there was no one driving it. I'm not exaggerating. There was no one in the driver's seat. I could see clearly through the windshield from my elevated position on the school bus. The steering wheel was moving on its own. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the glare from the sun was playing tricks on my eyes. But that wasn't even the worst part. In the back seat, directly across from my window, was a woman, but she wasn't sitting normally. Her entire torso and head were turned completely toward me, facing my window at a 90-degree angle from how a person would normally sit in a car. It was as if her body had been twisted unnaturally to stare directly at me as the car passed by. She had long black hair that looked messy and unkempt, hanging down past her shoulders, but her face, God, her face was just wrong. It wasn't clear. It was like looking at someone through frosted glass, or like when a photo is taken while someone is moving, just blurry enough that I couldn't make out specific features, but I could tell she was staring right at me. For a split second, our eyes met, or at least I felt like they did. I couldn't actually see her eyes clearly, but I felt her gaze lock onto mine. The car wasn't going that fast, maybe 30 miles per hour, but that moment seemed to stretch out forever. My stomach dropped, and I felt cold all over. My first thought was to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe the driver was reaching for something on the floor, but no, there was definitely no hand on the wheel, and from where I was sitting on the bus, I had a perfect view into that car. If someone had been bending down, I would have seen at least part of them. The driver's seat was completely empty. Maybe it was some kind of weird prank. But this was 2002. Self-driving cars weren't a thing yet, and the woman in the back seat, that wasn't a prank. That was something else entirely. I remember clutching my backpack tightly against my chest, suddenly aware that I had stopped breathing. The moment probably lasted only a couple of seconds before the SUV passed from my view. I turned my head to try to keep watching it, but another car blocked my line of sight, and then the bus turned onto a side street. I wanted to say something, to point it out to someone else, but the words caught in my throat. By the time I could have formed a coherent sentence, it was gone. And who would believe me anyway? Hey, I just saw a car with no driver and a creepy woman staring at me from the back seat. Yeah, right. Even now, typing this out, I know how crazy it sounds. When I got home that day, I was a mess. My mom noticed right away that something was wrong. I told her I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't exactly a lie. My stomach was in knots, and I felt lightheaded. I went straight to my room and sat on my bed, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe my Ritalin wearing off had something to do with it, but I knew that wasn't right. ADHD medication doesn't cause hallucinations as it wears off, and I wasn't the type of kid who made things up or had an overactive imagination. I was actually pretty logical for my age. My dad always said I had an engineer's mind because I liked to figure out how things worked. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's blurry face staring at me. I kept my bedside lamp on until morning, something I hadn't done since I was much younger and afraid of the dark. The next day at school, I was exhausted but also kind of desperate to talk to someone about what I'd seen. During lunch, I tried telling my best friend Katie about it. She listened politely, but I could tell by her expression that she didn't believe me. She suggested maybe I had dozed off on the bus and dreamed it. I knew I hadn't. For the next few days, I was hyper-vigilant on the bus ride home. I stared out the window at every passing car, half afraid and half hoping I'd see the green SUV again. I never did. About a week later, I finally worked up the courage to tell my dad. He was always the more understanding parent when it came to weird stuff. He didn't laugh or dismiss me outright, which I appreciated. Instead, he asked questions. Was I sure there was no driver? Could they have been slouched down? Was the woman maybe a mannequin or something placed in the back as a joke? I had considered all these explanations already and ruled them out. The car was definitely moving normally in traffic. There was no driver, and the woman was no mannequin. She had moved her head slightly to follow me as the car passed. That detail made my skin crawl even as I told my dad about it. He finally suggested that maybe there was a logical explanation I just couldn't see from my angle on the bus. Maybe the driver was extremely short, or maybe there was some kind of mechanical setup allowing someone to drive from the back seat. He didn't say he didn't believe me, but I could tell he was trying to find a rational explanation to make me feel better. It didn't work. I knew what I saw. The weeks passed, and I stopped talking about it. People were starting to give me weird looks when I brought it up. My mom even asked if I wanted to talk to someone, meaning a therapist, which made me realize how crazy I sounded. So I shut up about it and tried to forget. But I never did forget. Not really. Over the years, I've occasionally searched online for similar experiences. Driverless car before self-driving technology. Woman with blurry face in car. Supernatural experiences with vehicles. I've found some creepy stories, sure, but nothing quite like what I experienced. There was one night during my sophomore year of high school when I was at a sleepover and we started telling scary stories. I told them about the driverless car and the woman in the back seat. In the dark, with everyone already primed for scary tales, my friends actually seemed to believe me. One of them, Jess, got really freaked out and said it sounded like a ghost or something from another dimension that had somehow crossed into ours for just a moment. I'd never considered that angle before. It was almost comforting to think it might have been something supernatural rather than questioning my own sanity. Almost. I'm 29 now, and I still think about that day sometimes. I've never experienced anything like it again. No more driverless cars, until they actually became a real technology, which still freaks me out a little. No more blurry-faced women staring at me, but the memory is as vivid now as it was then. What bothers me the most looking back is the deliberateness of it all. The woman was positioned exactly right to see me as the car passed. She was staring directly at me, not just in my general direction. It felt intentional, like I was meant to see her, like she was looking specifically for me. Sometimes I wonder if she found what she was looking for. I drive that same boulevard occasionally now. As an adult, it's been widened since then with new businesses and developments along the route. But whenever I pass the spot where I think it happened, I always check my rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a dark green SUV with no driver following me. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm alone in my car at a red light, I'll glance at the vehicles around me, scanning the back seats for faces that don't quite look right. I don't know what I saw that day, a glitch in reality, a ghost, something my 12-year-old brain couldn't process correctly. All I know is that it happened. I saw it. And even now, all these years later, I still catch myself watching passing cars, wondering if I'll ever see that woman again, and terrified of what might happen if I do. Story 9. I've never told anyone this story because honestly, I was afraid people would think I was making it up. I know what I heard and saw though, and it still messes with me 6 years later. Back in 2017, my mom and I were living in this small town in Pennsylvania. We'd moved into this converted button factory that had been turned into apartments. The building was super old, like over 100 years old, and it still had that creepy industrial feel to it. There were 2 floors with several apartments, and this massive workhouse basement underneath everything. The elevator never worked right, but thankfully we were on the first floor. Our apartment was decent enough, nothing fancy, but home. My bedroom was in the corner of the apartment, and directly across from it was our bathroom. The bathroom had this foam tile ceiling and a small shower. I know it sounds weird to focus on a bathroom, but trust me, this is important. I was 8 at the time, and I always hated that bathroom, especially at night. Mom would leave the door open when I went to bed since I was scared of the dark, but that almost made it worse because I could see into it from my bed. When the lights were off, it was pitch black in there, like couldn't see your hand in front of your face, dark. The building was settling all the time, and in that corner of the apartment there was always creaking. It kept me up a lot. One night in late October, I stayed up past my bedtime playing on my Nintendo DS under the covers. Mom had already gone to sleep, and it must have been around 11:30 or midnight when I finally put my game down. I was lying there trying to fall asleep, but I kept staring at the bathroom doorway. I don't know why, but that night I felt like something was watching me from in there. I know kids get scared of dumb stuff all the time, but this was different. I couldn't look away. It felt like if I closed my eyes, something would come out. So I just laid there, staring into the darkness for what felt like hours. That's when I started noticing the sounds. At first, it was just the usual creaking of the old building, but then it changed. It became more deliberate. There was scratching, like fingernails dragging across the ceiling, then skittering, like something moving quickly back and forth, then thumping, like something heavy dropping or moving around. I told myself it was just mice. We'd had them before in the kitchen, and Mom had set traps. But these sounds were too loud, too heavy to be mice. They were coming from right above the bathroom ceiling, and they seemed to be getting closer to the bathroom itself. Then I heard it. A giggle, a quiet little laugh, like a young boy's. It came from directly above the shower area. I completely froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. because I knew for a fact there were no little boys living in our building. The people above us were an older couple who never had visitors. And this laugh, it wasn't like it was coming through the ceiling from the apartment above. It sounded like it was in the ceiling, right above our bathroom. The worst part was that it felt directed at me, like whatever was up there knew I was listening and was laughing at my fear. I started crying silently, tears running down my face, but I still couldn't move or call out for my mom. I just kept staring at the bathroom doorway, terrified that something was going to crawl down from the ceiling. The scratching and skittering continued for maybe another 20 minutes, moving around above the bathroom. Then it stopped. The silence was almost worse. I must have eventually fallen asleep from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember is my mom finding me in the morning, still staring at the bathroom with dried tears on my face. I told her I had a nightmare, and she let me sleep in her bed the next night. I didn't tell her what really happened, because I thought she wouldn't believe me. The next morning, I had to use the bathroom. I remember standing at the doorway for a long time before going in. Everything looked normal in the daylight coming through the small window. I went in, used the toilet, and was about to leave when I glanced up at the ceiling. One of the foam ceiling tiles above the shower was pushed aside. Not fallen down, but shifted to the side, revealing a dark opening. My stomach dropped. I ran out and got my mom, pulling her into the bathroom to show her. When she saw it, her face got all serious. She grabbed a chair from the kitchen and carefully stood on it to look into the opening. I remember her shining her phone flashlight up there and then immediately getting down. The hole revealed a crawl space above our ceiling. It wasn't a normal attic or anything. It was this 3-foot-high space that apparently ran across the entire building. It was pitch black up there, and it was exactly where the skittering and the laughter had come from the night before. Mom immediately called our landlord. He came over that afternoon and brought a ladder to check it out. He climbed up and shined his flashlight around, saying he didn't see anything unusual. No animals, no people, nothing that could have moved the tile. He suggested that maybe air pressure or the wind had shifted it. That made absolutely no sense. Our bathroom was in the interior of the building with no vents or windows near the ceiling, and the tile hadn't fallen. It had been pushed aside, like something had moved it from inside the crawl space. The landlord replaced the tile and left. Mom seemed satisfied with his explanation, but I wasn't. I knew what I'd heard. That night, I begged to sleep in my mom's room again. She let me, thinking I was just scared because of the ceiling tile. I didn't fall asleep until she did. And even then, I kept waking up throughout the night, thinking I heard the scratching again. The next morning, I went to check the bathroom before school. The ceiling tile was moved again. Not as much as before, just slightly askew, like something had pushed against it, but hadn't fully moved it aside. I didn't tell my mom. I grabbed the chair myself and fixed the tile, pushing it firmly back into place. I did the same thing the next morning and the morning after that. Every single day, that same tile would be slightly moved. Never any of the others, just the one above the shower. The scratching and skittering continued every night. Sometimes it would move to other parts of the apartment's ceiling, but it always started and ended above the bathroom. I started sleeping with my bedroom door closed, which helped a little, but I could still hear it. The worst was when I had to shower. I'd stand under the water, feeling exposed and vulnerable, staring up at that ceiling tile the whole time, terrified it would move while I was in there. I started taking the fastest showers of my life. About 2 weeks after it all started, I heard the giggle again. It was a Friday night and Mom had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. I was in my room, trying to read a book to distract myself. The scratching had been going on for about an hour when suddenly it stopped. Then came the giggle, that same childish laugh, but this time it sounded closer, like whatever it was had moved the tile aside again. I couldn't help myself. I got out of bed and crept to my doorway, peering across to the bathroom. It was dark, but I could see the bathroom ceiling from where I stood. The tile was moved again, creating a black hole in the ceiling. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, I swear I saw something move in that darkness. Not clearly, just a shifting of the shadows, like something was positioning itself near the opening. Then came another giggle, and I heard a whisper that sounded like my name. I ran to my mum on the couch and shook her awake, sobbing. I finally told her everything, the laughing, the scratching, how the tile moved every night. She was concerned, but still thought I was just having bad dreams or an overactive imagination. She checked the bathroom, and sure enough, the tile was moved again. This time she called the landlord the next morning and insisted he do a more thorough inspection. He brought in a maintenance guy who went up into the crawl space from an access panel in the hallway. They spent about an hour up there, and when they came back down, they said they'd found some evidence of squirrels that must have gotten in through a gap in the exterior wall. They patched the supposed hole and set some traps just in case. But I knew it wasn't squirrels. Squirrels don't laugh. They don't whisper your name. The activity didn't stop after their fix. If anything, it got worse. The scratching became more aggressive, like something was angry it had been disturbed. The tile would be moved further each morning. Mom finally started to believe me when she heard the scratching herself one night when we were watching TV. After about a month of this, Mom asked the landlord if we could move to a different apartment in the building. Fortunately, there was a vacancy on the second floor on the opposite side of the building. We moved the following weekend. The weird thing is, once we moved, it all stopped. No more scratching, no more moved tiles, no more giggles. Whatever was in that ceiling space didn't follow us to the new apartment. We lived in that building for another year before moving to a different town. I never found out what was in that ceiling. Sometimes I wonder if someone else moved into our old apartment and experienced the same thing. To this day, I still check bathroom ceilings whenever I'm in a new place. I still sleep with my bedroom door closed, and I still can't shake the feeling that something was watching me from that dark space above our bathroom, something that knew my name and found my fear amusing. Story 10. I still can't explain what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. I'm writing this down because I can't sleep, can't eat right, and maybe putting it into words will help me process it. Maybe one of you has experienced something similar on Highway 51 and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. It was the last weekend of October, around 11 at night. I was hauling a load of machine parts from Millsville to Oak Ridge, a route I've done dozens of times. The dispatcher had me take Highway 51 to save time, even though I've always hated that stretch of road. It's mostly deserted, cuts through miles of dense forest, and has spotty cell service at best. The weather had turned nasty that night. A thick fog had settled in, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath inside the cab. My headlights barely cut through the mist, making everything beyond 20 feet look like a gray wall. I had the radio on to keep me company, but it was mostly static with occasional fragments of late-night talk shows fading in and out. I remember checking my fuel gauge and thinking I should have filled up at the last truck stop. I was running lower than I liked for that particular stretch of road. There's about 80 miles of nothing out there. No gas stations, no diners, just trees and the occasional dirt road leading God knows where. That's when I saw him. He appeared so suddenly at the side of the road that I nearly swerved. Just standing there in the fog, thumb out, a tall, gaunt man wearing a dark coat. I almost didn't stop. I have a strict rule against picking up hitchhikers. Too many horror stories in this line of work. But something about the way he was standing there, alone in the middle of nowhere in that weather. I don't know why, but I hit the brakes. I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. "Where you headed?" I called out. He stepped closer, and right away something felt off. Under the dome light of my cab, I could see his face clearly. He was pale. Not just regular pale, but an unhealthy, almost grayish pallor. His cheeks were sunken and dark circles ringed his eyes, but his clothes looked clean, and he spoke clearly enough. "Cedar Ridge, if you're going that way," he said. His voice was deeper than I expected, almost hoarse. Cedar Ridge was about 40 miles ahead, so I nodded and unlocked the door. "Hop in." He climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with him a blast of cold air that seemed to linger even after he closed the door. He didn't have any bags with him, not even a backpack, which struck me as odd for someone hitchhiking. "Thanks," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Not many people stop on this road." "What are you doing out here so late?" I asked, pulling back onto the highway. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, if that was possible. "Car broke down a few miles back," he said, but didn't elaborate. I waited for him to say more, where his car was, why he hadn't called for help, but he just stared straight ahead at the road. I tried making conversation. "You from Cedar Ridge?" "Just passing through," he answered. When he turned to look at me, I noticed his eyes caught the light in an unusual way, reflecting it back like an animal's might. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. "What about you?" he asked. "You drive this route often?" "Few times a month," I said. "Not my favorite, especially at night." He nodded slowly. "Highway 51 has a reputation." That made me glance over at him. "What kind of reputation?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "People say strange things happen here, especially after dark." I forced a laugh. "Like what? Ghosts? Aliens?" He didn't laugh back. "Worse things. Things that follow you." I remember getting a chill when he said that. I reached to turn up the heater, even though it was already running full blast. We drove in silence for a while after that. The radio had gone completely to static, so I switched it off. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers clearing the condensation that kept forming on the windshield. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Another vehicle on the road, nothing unusual, but as I watched, I realized the lights were closing in fast, too fast. Within seconds, they were right behind me, high beams blazing, nearly blinding me in the mirror. "Someone's in a hurry," I muttered, slowing slightly to let them pass. The hitchhiker suddenly tensed up. "Don't stop," he said. "Don't slow down." "What? They just want to pass." "Don't let them," he insisted. His voice had changed, become more urgent. "And don't look back at them." "What are you talking about?" I asked, but even as I said it, something about those headlights made me uneasy. They were too bright, too white, and they didn't move to pass even though I'd slowed down. "Just drive," the hitchhiker said. "Faster if you can." Against my better judgment, I pressed the accelerator. The speedometer crept up to 70, 75, pushing 80 on a road marked for 55. The fog made this incredibly dangerous, but somehow those headlights stayed with us, right on our tail. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Who's following us?" The hitchhiker gripped the dashboard. "Highway 51, he said, as if that explained everything. "It's cursed. People who travel it, they don't always make it out." "What are you talking about?" My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Turn off the road," he said suddenly. "There." He pointed to a dirt road I would have missed completely in the fog. Without thinking, I cranked the wheel hard. The truck skidded, nearly jackknifing before I got it under control. We bounced down the unpaved road, my trailer swaying dangerously behind us. The headlights followed. "It's still behind us," I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "I know," the hitchhiker said, oddly calm now. "It always follows." The dirt road narrowed, branches scraping against the sides of my truck. I had no idea where we were going, only that I had to get away from whatever was behind us. The headlights stayed with us, sometimes falling back a bit around curves, but always returning, always gaining. "There," the hitchhiker pointed again. "That cabin." Through the trees, I saw the dark outline of a small building. It looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. Every instinct told me not to stop, to keep driving, but I was running out of road and options. I slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding to a stop in front of the cabin. The headlights behind us had disappeared, but I could hear an engine idling somewhere in the darkness. "Inside," the hitchhiker said, already opening his door. Quickly, I grabbed my flashlight from under the seat and followed him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The cabin door hung on one hinge, and it swung open with a groan when the hitchhiker pushed it. Inside was worse than I expected. The place smelled of decay and something else I couldn't identify. something chemical and unpleasant. My flashlight beam revealed an open space with a collapsed table, a rusted wood stove, and walls covered with photographs. I moved closer, my breath catching. They were photos of people, dozens of them, all men with haunted expressions. Most wore trucker caps or uniforms. Some photos looked decades old, while others seemed recent. All had been taken in what looked like this very cabin. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. The hitchhiker stood in the center of the room, oddly still. "A waypoint," he said, "for those who get caught on Highway 51. I turned to him, the flashlight beam catching his face. In that moment, I noticed something I hadn't before. His clothes were outdated, not just unfashionable, but truly from another time. The coat he wore had a style I'd only seen in old photos. "Who are you?" I asked, backing toward the door. "What's happening here?" Before he could answer, a sound outside froze us both. Heavy footsteps on the porch. The door we'd come through was still open, and I could see nothing but darkness beyond it. Then the footsteps stopped. The hitchhiker looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. "It's here," he whispered. A shadow filled the doorway, larger than a man, its edges seeming to waver and shift. I couldn't make out features, just a vague humanoid shape with eyes that blazed like headlights. I raised my flashlight, but the beam dimmed, flickered, and went out, plunging us into darkness. The hitchhiker screamed, a sound no human throat should make, and I felt something rush past me, a blast of cold air that stole my breath. I stumbled backward, tripped over something, and fell. My head struck the floor hard, and everything went black. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my windshield. I was in my truck, seat reclined, parked at a rest stop just off Highway 51. According to my dashboard clock, it was 6 in the morning. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing, but my clothes were damp with sweat, and when I checked my fuel gauge, it showed I'd driven those 80 miles I remembered from the night before. The passenger seat was empty, no sign anyone had been there. I started the engine with shaking hands and pulled back onto Highway 51. The morning was clear, no fog, and the road looked completely normal in the daylight. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those bright headlights again. About 10 miles down the road, I passed a sign for Cedar Ridge, and just beyond it, standing on the shoulder, was a tall figure in a dark coat. I didn't slow down, didn't stop, just kept my eyes locked on the road ahead. But in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I saw it turn to watch me pass, and behind it, almost hidden among the trees, was what looked like the shadowy outline of an old cabin. I made it to Oak Ridge without stopping again, delivered my load, fueled up, and took the long way home, avoiding Highway 51 completely. I've been having nightmares every night since then. In them, I'm always driving through fog, and those headlights are always behind me, getting closer and closer. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who or what that hitchhiker was, or what was following us. All I know is I'm never driving Highway 51 again, especially after dark, and if you're smart, you won't either. Story 11. I've been hesitating to share this for almost 3 years now. Every time I think about posting it somewhere, I talk myself out of it. What happened that day in Swansea Bay doesn't make any logical sense, and I'm afraid people will either think I'm making it up or that I was hallucinating, but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe, just maybe, someone else has seen something similar. It was the summer of 2020. COVID restrictions had finally eased up in Wales, and my girlfriend Ellie and I were desperate to get out of our flat. We'd been cooped up for months, and the beautiful weather was too tempting to ignore. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July, around 2 o'clock. I remember because I'd taken the day off work specifically to enjoy the rare stretch of sunny days we were having. Swansea Bay has this concrete section along the coastline that's built like giant steps, almost like a small amphitheater facing the ocean. It's a popular spot for people to sit and enjoy the view, especially when the tide is out and there's that vast expanse of wet sand stretching toward the water. We'd brought a small picnic, some sandwiches, crisps, and a couple of drinks. Nothing special, just an excuse to be outside. The bay was busy, but not crowded. You know how it is on weekdays. Enough people around to create atmosphere, but not so many that you feel cramped. We found a good spot on the concrete steps about halfway down. The tide was out, exposing about 100 yards of damp sand before the water started. The sun was beating down, and there was barely any wind. The water was almost completely still, like glass. That detail stands out because it made what happened next even more visible. We'd been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes just chatting and enjoying our food when Ellie suddenly stopped mid-sentence and pointed toward the water. "Lucas, what are those things?" she asked. I followed her gaze and didn't see anything at first. Then I spotted them, about 200 feet from the shoreline, hovering just above the water's surface. A formation of what looked like diamond-shaped objects, perfectly arranged in a grid pattern. I squinted, thinking maybe it was just a weird reflection, or maybe some kind of marine birds I wasn't familiar with. But as I focused, I realized these things were definitely not natural. They were completely identical, each one a perfect diamond shape, maybe 1.5 feet across. They were translucent black, like smoked glass, and they seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. "Do you see that?" I asked Ellie, not taking my eyes off the formation. "Yeah," she whispered. "What the hell are they?" The most unsettling thing wasn't just their appearance, but how they moved. They weren't floating or drifting like you'd expect something on water to move. They were mechanical, precise. The entire formation would hover completely still for a few seconds, then, without any transition, zip to a new position a few feet away. Not gliding or flying, but more like teleporting. One moment here, the next moment there. But they always maintained that perfect grid arrangement, like they were connected by invisible strings. I fumbled for my phone to take a video, but my hands were shaking. By the time I got the camera open, the formation had shifted again. They were now hovering just inches above the water's surface, almost touching it, but not quite. As I watched, one of the diamond shapes seemed to merge with the water, disappearing completely, only to reappear a moment later, about 10 feet away from its original position. The others followed suit, creating a ripple effect through the formation. It was like watching a computer simulation rather than something in the real world. "Are we the only ones seeing this?" Ellie asked, her voice barely audible. I tore my eyes away from the water to look around. The bay was still dotted with people, families on the beach, couples walking along the shoreline, a few people sitting near us on the concrete steps, but nobody else seemed to be reacting. No pointing, no staring, no frantic phone recording, just normal beach activities. "I don't think anyone else notices," I said, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach despite the warm day. We kept watching, transfixed. The formation continued its bizarre movement patterns for about 2 minutes. Then something happened that still gives me chills when I think about it. An older man was walking his dog along the shoreline, heading straight toward where the diamond shapes were hovering. The dog was off-leash, running ahead and occasionally splashing in the shallow water. Both man and dog were on a direct path to intersect with the formation. "They're going to walk right through them," Ellie whispered, gripping my arm. I held my breath as the man and dog approached the spot where the black diamonds hovered. The dog reached them first, running straight through the area where the formation was clearly visible to us. The animal showed no reaction whatsoever, no barking, no hesitation, not even a curious sniff. It was as if the diamonds weren't there at all. The man followed a few seconds later, walking directly through the formation without the slightest pause or notice. "They can't see them," I said, my voice catching. "How can they not see them?" Ellie's fingernails were digging into my arm now. Maybe we're seeing things, mass hallucination or something. But it felt too real, too detailed to be a hallucination. And why would both of us hallucinate the exact same thing? The formation continued its strange dance for about 3 more minutes. Sometimes the diamond shapes would hover motionless. Other times they'd zip to new positions in perfect unison. Occasionally, Individual shapes would dip below the water's surface momentarily before rejoining the group. The movements were purposeful, coordinated, like they were following some predetermined pattern or conducting some kind of survey. Then, with no warning or build-up, all of the diamond shapes simultaneously descended into the water and disappeared. 1 second they were there, performing their bizarre movements. The next second, the bay was completely normal, just water and sky and the distant horizon. We sat in stunned silence for at least a minute. Finally, Ellie spoke. "Did that really just happen?" I nodded slowly, still staring at the now empty spot where the formation had been. Yeah, it did. We stayed at the bay for another hour, barely touching our food, waiting to see if the diamonds would return. They didn't. The rest of the afternoon passed with painful normality. People swimming, kids building sandcastles, seagulls scavenging for chips. Not a single black diamond in sight. On the walk home, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of military drone test, but why would they be testing over a public beach in plain sight? Could it have been a strange reflection from the water combined with some atmospheric condition? But that wouldn't explain the independent movements and perfect formation. A flock of unusual birds? Definitely not. Birds don't move like that, don't maintain perfect geometric patterns, and aren't diamond-shaped and translucent black. We even considered the possibility of it being some elaborate prank involving underwater devices and projections. But the technology required for something that's sophisticated, especially with the way they moved and maintained formation, would be far beyond what some prankster could pull off. In the days that followed, we scoured local news and social media for any mention of strange sightings in Swansea Bay. Nothing. We cautiously asked a few friends if they'd heard about anything unusual at the beach lately. They just gave us confused looks. About a week later, we returned to the same spot at roughly the same time of day, hoping to catch another glimpse. Nothing. We've been back dozens of times since then, sometimes together, sometimes separately. I still live in Swansea and visit the bay at least once a month, always watching the water with a mixture of hope and dread. The longer time passes, the more I doubt myself. Did we really see what I think we saw? The memory remains crystal clear, the perfect formation, the mechanical movements, the way they seemed visible only to us. But with no evidence and no corroboration, it's easy to wonder if somehow we both experienced some shared delusion. What disturbs me most is the apparent invisibility of these objects to everyone else. That man and his dog walked right through them without noticing. Nobody else on the beach reacted. It was as if these things existed in some layer of reality that only Ellie and I could perceive. I've spent countless hours researching similar phenomena online. The closest things I've found are accounts of rods or skyfish, supposed atmospheric creatures that move too quickly for the human eye to see but can sometimes be captured on camera. But what we saw wasn't fast-moving or elusive. It was right there in plain sight, hovering deliberately for a full 5 minutes. Ellie and I broke up about 6 months after the incident, for unrelated reasons. But we still occasionally text each other when one of us visits the bay. Always the same question: see anything interesting today? So far, the answer has always been no. I'm not a superstitious person or someone who believes in the paranormal. Before this, I would have scoffed at accounts like the one I'm sharing now, but I know what I saw. Those diamond-shaped objects were real, at least to us, and their behavior suggested intelligence, purpose, and technology far beyond anything I can explain. So I'm putting this out there in the hope that someone else has witnessed something similar, maybe in Swansea Bay, maybe elsewhere. I need to know I'm not crazy. I need to know those black diamonds were real, and most of all, I need to know what they were and why they were there. Every time I visit the bay now, I find myself scanning the water's surface, half hoping to see them again, half dreading it. Whatever those things were, whether some unknown natural phenomenon, advanced technology, or something else entirely. They've left me with a persistent feeling that there's more to our world than what most of us perceive, and that thought is both fascinating and terrifying. Story 12. I've never been a believer in ghosts or the supernatural. Growing up, I'd roll my eyes when friends would share their ghost stories at sleepovers. My parents raised me to be practical. Dad's an engineer and Mom's a science teacher, so I was taught to look for logical explanations. That all changed during my freshman year at Woodbury University. Woodbury isn't just any college. It's one of those East Coast institutions with buildings dating back to the 1700s. The kind of place with ivy-covered walls, underground tunnels connecting buildings, and plenty of stories about famous alumni. It was my dream school, and when I got accepted, I was beyond excited. I moved into Prescott Hall in late August, just before classes started. It's one of the oldest dorms on campus, built in 1872 according to the plaque by the entrance. The building itself is beautiful in that creepy Gothic way, all dark wood, tall windows, and creaky floors. My room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long hallway. My roommate Marcus seemed cool right away. He was from California, studying film, and like me, was pretty down to earth. Our room was decent-sized for a dorm. 2 beds, 2 desks, 2 dressers, and a shared closet with these old wooden doors that looked original to the building. The first few weeks were normal. We were busy with orientation, figuring out where our classes were and trying to make friends. It wasn't until about a month in that weird stuff started happening. I remember the first incident clearly. I was studying late one night, probably around 2 in the morning, while Marcus was asleep. I had my headphones on, typing away at a paper, when the closet doors suddenly flew open. Not just drifted open, they flew open, like someone had yanked them. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My first thought was that they weren't latched properly, but when I got up to close them, I noticed they had those old-fashioned latches that click into place. There's no way they could have just popped open on their own. I closed them, made sure the latch was secure, and went back to my paper. About 20 minutes later, the same thing happened. This time Marcus woke up. "What the hell was that?" he mumbled, half asleep. "The closet doors just opened by themselves," I told him. Again. He stared at me for a second, then rolled over. "Probably just the building settling. This place is ancient." I wanted to believe that explanation, but it didn't feel right. The way those doors flew open, it was like someone was messing with us. Over the next few days, we noticed other small things. My psychology textbook slid off my desk when no one was near it. The poster of Marcus's favorite band, which he'd taped securely to the wall, would be on the floor when we returned from class. My laptop would be closed when I was sure I'd left it open. We joked about it at first. "Guess the dorm ghost doesn't like your taste in music," I'd tell Marcus when his poster fell, again. But after 2 weeks of this happening almost daily, it started getting under our skin. The incidents were becoming more frequent and more obvious. One night, all the books on my shelf flew off at once while we were both sitting there. Another time, Marcus's desk lamp turned on by itself when we were about to fall asleep. Then came the night noises. We'd be woken up by what sounded like footsteps pacing across our room. Sometimes there'd be scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. The worst was the whispering, like someone was standing between our beds, muttering things we couldn't quite make out. By mid-October, these incidents were happening 3 or 4 times a week. We started keeping a log, comparing notes with each other. We didn't tell many people at first. Who wants to be the weird freshman claiming their room is haunted? But eventually we mentioned it to some guys down the hall. "Oh, you must have Jim," said Tyler, a junior who lived a few doors down. He said it so casually, like we'd mentioned having a mouse problem. "Jim?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, the ghost that haunts the East Wing. He's been around forever. My brother stayed in your exact room 4 years ago and dealt with the same shit." He told us the story. Apparently, the ghost was rumored to be a student who died in the building back in the 1930s. Some said he fell down the stairs after a night of drinking. Others claimed it was suicide. Either way, according to dorm law, he's been messing with students ever since, particularly in our room and the ones directly above and below it. After that conversation, We started calling our ghost Jim too. Somehow, giving it a name made it less scary. "Jim's being a dick tonight," Marcus would say when his phone charger would unplug itself for the third time. Or I'd come back from the shower to find my bed completely stripped and say, "Really, Jim, I just made that bed." But things escalated in November. The incidents became more aggressive. My desk chair would spin around on its own. The temperature in our room would drop suddenly. I'm talking 20 degrees in minutes, to the point where we could see our breath. One night, we both woke up to find all our clothes from the closet piled in the middle of the room. The final straw was when Marcus woke up with 3 long scratches down his back. They weren't deep, but they were definitely not there when he went to bed, and there was nothing on or near his bed that could have caused them. "That's it," he said that morning. "We're either getting proof of this, or we're moving out." Marcus borrowed some equipment from his film professor, a night vision camera and some audio recording gear. We set it up carefully, positioning the camera to capture most of the room. We were determined to catch Jim in the act. For an entire week, we recorded everything. Every night, we'd start the camera before going to bed and check the footage each morning. During the day, we'd leave the audio recorder running while we were in class. And you know what happened during that week? Absolutely nothing. Not a single door opened. Not one book fell. The room temperature stayed consistent. It was the most normal week we'd had since moving in. "Maybe Jim's camera shy," I joked on the 7th day. But we were both frustrated. We'd wasted a week, and now we looked like idiots who'd imagined the whole thing. That night, Marcus packed up the equipment. "Professor needs it back anyway," he sighed, placing the camera on his desk, ready to return it the next day. We went to bed, feeling defeated. Around 3 in the morning, we were both jolted awake by a massive crash. I hit the lights to find the camera on the floor, completely shattered. The tripod was across the room, bent like someone had stomped on it. We looked at each other, hearts racing. There was no rational explanation for this. The camera had been securely set up on a stable surface. Even if it had somehow fallen, it wouldn't have ended up in pieces, with the tripod 10 feet away. "He waited," Marcus whispered. "He fucking waited until we turned it off." That realization was the scariest part of the whole experience. Whatever Jim was, he was aware. He knew we were trying to capture evidence of him, and he deliberately waited until we stopped trying before making the most destructive move yet. It wasn't random activity, it was conscious. We had to pay the film department for the broken equipment, which sucked. But more importantly, we had to come to terms with the fact that we were sharing our room with something intelligent and potentially malicious. Strangely, after the camera incident, the activity decreased. It didn't stop completely. We'd still occasionally wake up to find things rearranged or hear those footsteps at night, but it was less frequent and less aggressive. It's like Jim had made his point and was now content to just remind us occasionally that he was still there. We considered asking for a room change, but by then it was nearly the end of first semester, and the housing department wasn't sympathetic to "our room is haunted" as a reason to move. Plus, we'd developed a weird relationship with our ghost. As long as he wasn't scratching us or destroying property, we could deal with his antics. When we came back after winter break, Jim seemed calmer. The incidents dropped to maybe once a week, usually something minor, like a book falling or the closet doors opening. We'd just say, "Evening, Jim," and go about our business. The most convincing evidence came at the end of the year. While moving out, we met the incoming freshmen who would be taking our room. We debated whether to tell them about Jim, but decided against it. We didn't want to scare them before they'd even moved in. But the following September, I ran into one of them at a party. Without any prompting from me, he started complaining about his haunted dorm room, describing the exact same phenomena we'd experienced: the closet doors, the falling objects, the whispers at night. He even mentioned that they'd started calling the ghost Jim after hearing about the dorm legend from other students. That confirmation changed me. I went from being someone who scoffed at ghost stories to someone who had lived one. I still try to find logical explanations for things, but I now accept that there are some experiences that defy conventional understanding. I'm a junior now, living off campus in a decidedly non-haunted apartment. Sometimes I walk past Prescott Hall and wonder if Jim is still there, messing with the current residents of room 316. Part of me wants to go back, to try again to capture evidence with better equipment, but another part of me knows Jim doesn't want to be documented. He made that pretty clear. So I just walk by, sometimes giving a little nod toward my old window, just in case he's watching. Story 13. I've been holding this in for 12 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I need to tell someone who might believe me because nobody in my family talks about it anymore. This happened back in 2011 when I was 14. My grandma lived on this old farmhouse in rural Ohio, deep in Appalachian country. Her place was surrounded by about 80 acres of dense forest, the kind where the trees grow so close together that it gets dark at noon. We used to visit every other Sunday for these big family dinners. All my aunts, uncles, and cousins would be there. It was usually boring adult stuff, but we kids would entertain ourselves. That Sunday started like any other. We ate Grandma's roast chicken and mashed potatoes while the adults talked about church and neighbors and whatever else. After dinner, my little cousin Ethan, he was like 6 or 7 at the time, said he wanted to head back to his parents' house, which was just down this gravel path that ran alongside the woods behind Grandma's. His mom, my Aunt Kelly, told him to wait until they were ready to leave, but he insisted he could walk by himself since it was only like a 5-minute walk. Eventually, she gave in. I remember I was helping clear the table when Ethan burst back through the door, maybe 3 minutes later. His face was ghost white, and he was breathing so hard he could barely get the words out. "There's something," he gasped, pointing frantically toward the back door. "Something in the woods." My Uncle Dave laughed and ruffled his hair. "Probably just a deer, buddy. They come close to the path sometimes." "No!" Ethan was practically in tears. "It's big. It's standing up." The adults exchanged those looks adults give when they think a kid is making stuff up. My aunt tried to calm him down, saying it was probably just shadows or his imagination, but Ethan was genuinely scared. I'd never seen him like that before. I don't know why, but I felt bad for him. Maybe because I was the cool older cousin or whatever, but I said, "I'll go check it out with you." I figured it was nothing, maybe a bear, though we didn't get many of those, or more likely just the wind moving branches around. Honestly, I was just bored and looking for an excuse to get away from dish duty. My aunt seemed relieved that I'd volunteered and said, "That's nice of you, Daniel. Show Ethan there's nothing to be afraid of." So Ethan and I headed out the back door and down the gravel path. It was around 5 in the afternoon, still plenty of daylight left. The path was maybe 10 feet wide with dense forest on the right side and a field on the left. Ethan was practically glued to my side, and I could feel him trembling. "Where did you see it?" I asked, expecting him to point at some tree stump or something. "Just up there," he whispered, pointing ahead, "by that big tree with the split trunk." I knew the tree he meant. This massive oak that had been struck by lightning years ago and split down the middle but somehow kept growing. It was maybe 100 yards down the path. We walked slowly. I was still thinking this was just Ethan being a little kid, seeing monsters in the shadows. But then about 50 feet from the split tree, I saw it. My blood went ice cold. About 3 yards ahead of us, just at the edge of the path where it met the woods, was something. I still don't have the right words for it. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and pitch black. Not black like dark skin or fur, but black like a hole in reality. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but with proportions all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging almost to the ground, and it seemed, I don't know how else to say this, it seemed to be vibrating or shimmering slightly, like heat waves off hot pavement. The face is what still haunts me. It had these tiny, beady eyes that looked wet and reflective, and a flat nose like a pug dog, but without any snout or muzzle, just a flat face with these features pressed into it. No visible mouth that I could see. It wasn't moving, just standing there, slightly vibrating. It didn't seem to be looking directly at us, more like staring into the middle distance, but somehow I knew it was aware of us. I grabbed Ethan's shoulder and slowly started backing up. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I was terrified that any sudden movement would make this thing charge at us. We backed up maybe 20 feet before I whispered to Ethan, "On three, we run. 1, 2, 3. We sprinted back to the house. I've never run so fast in my life. We burst through the back door and I slammed it shut behind us. Everyone at the table looked up, startled. "Daniel, what happened?" my mom asked, seeing my face. I was breathing so hard I could barely speak. "There's something out there." Ethan was right. Of course, nobody believed us. My dad said it was probably a black bear standing on its hind legs. My uncle suggested it might be someone from the neighboring property playing a prank. But I knew what I saw wasn't human or any animal I'd ever seen. I don't know what possessed me, but I suddenly had this urge to prove it to everyone. Maybe it was teenage stubbornness, or the fact that I didn't like being treated like I was making things up. So I said, "I'm going back out there, and I'm going to show you." My cousins Jake and Mia, Jake was my age and Mia was 9, said they'd come with me. The adults seemed to think having more of us go would prove there was nothing to be afraid of. "Just be back before dark," my mom said, clearly not taking us seriously. The 4 of us headed back down the path. I was terrified but also determined. I kept telling myself it was probably just a bear, even though I knew deep down it wasn't. "Where was it exactly?" Jake asked, trying to sound brave. "By the split tree," I said, pointing. "Right at the edge of the woods." We approached slowly. Jake was in front, then me, with Mia and Ethan hanging back a bit. And then we saw it again, in exactly the same spot, still vibrating slightly, still staring at nothing. "Holy shit," Jake whispered. He'd been so confident there would be nothing there that seeing it seemed to knock the wind out of him. "What is it?" Mia whimpered behind me. "I don't know," I said truthfully, "but we should go back and get Grandpa." Jake, always the impulsive one, took a single step forward. "Maybe it's just a..." He didn't finish his sentence because at that moment, the thing flinched. It was the only movement I'd seen it make, but it was so unnatural that it sent ice down my spine. It didn't flinch like a person or an animal. It seemed to briefly jump a few inches off the ground without using its legs, like a video glitch. The movement was instantaneous and all wrong. We didn't even need to say anything to each other. All 4 of us turned and ran back to the house. This time we were all talking over each other, trying to describe what we'd seen to the adults. "It's not a bear. It has these weird eyes. It jumped but didn't use its legs." My grandpa, who rarely got involved in nonsense as he called it, finally stood up. All right, I'll go take a look, if only to settle you kids down." But he didn't go immediately. He finished his coffee, put on his boots, and grabbed his shotgun from the cabinet. "Just in case it is a bear," he said. By the time he finally went out to check, almost an hour had passed. When he came back, he just shook his head. Nothing there, not even tracks. The adults gave us those patronizing kids and their imaginations looks, and the subject was dropped, but all 4 of us knew what we saw. Later that night, huddled in Grandma's living room while the adults played cards in the kitchen, we tried to make sense of it. "Maybe it was a ghost," Mia suggested. Jake shook his head. "Ghosts don't have physical bodies. That thing was solid." "It didn't look solid to me," I said. "It looked wrong, like it wasn't fully there." Ethan hadn't said much since we got back, but then he whispered something that still gives me chills. "It's still out there. It's waiting." We all went home that night, and nobody really talked about it again. I think the adults assumed we'd scared ourselves with ghost stories or something, but I know what I saw. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about those beady eyes and that unnatural movement. I refused to go near those woods when we visited Grandma. Eventually, the nightmares stopped and life went on, but I've never forgotten. I've spent years trying to find an explanation. I've looked into local legends, cryptids, even paranormal phenomena. Nothing quite matches what we saw. The closest thing might be shadow people, but even those descriptions don't capture the solid yet vibrating quality of this thing, or its strange face. What haunts me most is that I don't think it was aggressive. It just stood there, like it was observing or waiting for something. Sometimes I wonder if we interrupted it, or if it was trying to communicate somehow. Grandma passed away 3 years ago, and the property was sold. I've never been back to those woods, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I remember those beady eyes and that unnatural flinch, and I wonder if it's still there, standing by that split tree, vibrating slightly, waiting for someone else to notice it. I still talk to my cousins occasionally. Jake pretends he doesn't remember it clearly. Mia says she's convinced herself it was just a bear, but Ethan, who's a teenager now, still refuses to talk about it at all. The last time I brought it up, about 2 years ago, he just shook his head and said, "Some things should stay in the woods, Daniel." I don't know what we saw that day, but I know it wasn't natural, and I know all 4 of us saw the same thing. Whatever it was, it doesn't belong in our world. And the thought that keeps me up some nights is, what if there are more of them out there, just standing and waiting at the edges of dark woods all over the world? Story 14. I've always considered myself a practical guy. 38 years old, work construction, pay my taxes, go to mass on Sundays, and I heard humming. Not creepy humming, but beautiful, almost angelic, a melody I didn't recognize. I stood there, soap in my hair, just listening. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then faded away. What's weird is that I'm not as terrified as I should be. Don't get me wrong, I'm scared. My heart races every time something happens. But it's more like I'm startled, not horrified. It's like when someone jumps out at you from around a corner. You get that adrenaline spike. But once you realize it's just your buddy being a jerk, you calm down. Except in this case, it's not a buddy. It's something I can't explain. I've started collecting evidence. I keep my phone ready to record at all times. I've got a few audio clips of the breathing sounds and one of the humming. I even caught a shadow moving on video once, though it's not very clear. I've shown the clips to Lisa, and she agrees they're not normal. The evidence helps me stay sane, helps me remember I'm not imagining things. Lisa's mom suggested we get the place blessed, but I'm not sure that's the answer. Whatever's here doesn't feel evil, just present, insistent, like it wants us to know it's here. Tyler seems completely unbothered. Kids are weird like that, I guess. He talks about the nice lady like it's the most normal thing in the world. Once he said, "She knows you too, Daddy." He calls me Daddy even though I'm not his biological father. When I asked what he meant, he just shrugged and went back to his Legos. Last night was the latest incident. I was falling asleep, Lisa already out cold beside me. Right as I was drifting off, I heard the woman's voice again. The first one, the one that originally said my name, except this time she didn't say my name. She said, "We've been waiting for you." I sat bolt upright, fully awake now. The room was dark, silent. Lisa didn't stir. I whispered, "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing answered, but I swear the air in the room felt different, heavier, like when you're in a crowded elevator and everyone's standing too close. I didn't sleep much after that. I don't know what to do. We can't afford to move right now. We're locked into a lease, and rents in New York are insane. I've thought about setting up cameras in every room, but that feels like an invasion of Lisa and Tyler's privacy. Plus, what if we catch something on camera that's worse than what we've already experienced? Do I really want to see what's making those sounds? So for now, we're just living with it, whatever it is. Sometimes days go by with nothing happening, and I start to think maybe it's over. Then I'll hear my name again, or feel that cold electrical field wash over me, and I know it's still here. I've started responding when it calls my name. I'll say, "Yes," or "I'm here." Nothing answers, but it feels less scary somehow, acknowledging it, like we've reached some kind of understanding. The weirdest part is how normal our life still is outside of these experiences. I go to work, Lisa goes to her job, Tyler goes to school, we watch TV, eat dinner, argue about bills, all the usual stuff, and then one of us will hear a voice that shouldn't exist, and for a moment, reality feels paper thin. I don't know if our apartment is haunted or if it's something else entirely. All I know is that something knows my name, my full name, and it's not going away. Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night in August 4 years ago. Mike and I had been doing these nighttime bike rides for years. It was our thing. We both worked different shifts at the shipping warehouse, so late rides were perfect for catching up without the Florida heat trying to kill us. Our neighborhood in Northwest Florida isn't anything special. Just your typical suburban area about 20 minutes from the coast. Lots of older homes from the 70s and 80s, big oak trees everywhere, and streets that barely get any traffic after 9 p.m. The kind of place where nothing ever happens, you know. That night started like any other. I met Mike at the corner of Palmetto and Oak Ridge around 11:30. The air was thick with humidity, but there was a slight breeze coming in from the coast that made it bearable. I remember I was wearing my old FSU t-shirt and basketball shorts. Nothing special. Mike showed up with his portable speaker playing some low-key indie rock. Not loud enough to bother anyone, just background noise for our ride. We took our usual route, pedaling at a leisurely pace down the main road that cuts through our neighborhood. The streetlights were spaced far enough apart that there were these pockets of darkness between them. Never bothered us before. We'd done this route hundreds of times. We were about a mile into our ride, cruising down Magnolia Street, this long, straight residential road with massive oak trees on both sides. The branches create this natural canopy that blocks out most of the moonlight. I always liked that stretch because it was cooler under there, but after what happened, I haven't been back. I was slightly ahead of Mike, maybe 15 feet or so, when something in my gut just shifted. It's hard to explain, but it was like someone had suddenly turned up the volume on my instincts. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt this wave of cold wash over me despite the August heat. About 50 feet ahead, there was this particularly dark spot where two huge oaks grew right across from each other, their branches creating this tunnel of absolute darkness. Something moved in that shadow. At first I thought it might be someone walking their dog. It happens even at night sometimes, but the movement was too deliberate, too aware. I raised my hand to signal Mike to stop, and he pulled up beside me. I didn't say anything, couldn't say anything, just nodded toward the darkness ahead. That's when it emerged. I've seen plenty of wildlife in Florida, coyotes, foxes, even the occasional black bear further inland. This was nothing like that. What stepped out to the very edge of that shadow was what I can only describe as a wolf, but wrong. It was massive, easily the size of a Great Dane, maybe bigger, and it was completely unnaturally white, not cream or off-white, but pure white, like freshly fallen snow or a sheet of paper. The kind of white that almost seemed to give off its own light, yet somehow didn't. It sat right at the boundary between shadow and the dim glow from the distant streetlight, perfectly still, staring directly at us. Its eyes, God, its eyes. They weren't glowing or red or anything dramatic like that. They were just intensely focused, aware in a way that animal eyes shouldn't be, like it knew exactly who we were and why it was there. I glanced at Mike to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, and the look on his face told me he was seeing exactly what I was seeing. When I looked back, a second creature had appeared, identical to the first in every way, sitting right next to it. I didn't see it approach or emerge. It was just suddenly there, as if it had materialized out of the darkness itself. We were frozen, both of us straddling our bikes about 50 feet away from these things. No one moved. The only sound was Mike's speaker still quietly playing some indie song that now felt absurdly out of place. "Do you see that?" Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the creatures. "Yeah." "What the fuck are they?" "I don't know." These weren't normal wolves. Florida doesn't even have wolves. They weren't coyotes or dogs or anything I could rationalize. They were too big, too white, too intentional. Everything about them felt calculated. They weren't just animals that happened to cross our path. They were there for us. I remember thinking that if they charged, we'd have no chance. They'd catch us before we could even turn our bikes around. But they didn't move. They just watched. What struck me most was how they behaved at the edge of the shadows. They never stepped fully into the light. They sat right at the threshold, half illuminated, like they were bound to the darkness but wanted us to see them. It reminded me of how a predator might behave, showing itself just enough to paralyze its prey with fear. Minutes passed like this. Could have been 2, could have been 10. Time felt warped. Then, without any warning or apparent reason, both creatures simultaneously turned their heads slightly to the right, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. "We should go," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Mike nodded, but neither of us moved. It was like we were under some kind of spell, unable to do anything but stare at these impossible animals. Then the first one, the one that had appeared initially, opened its mouth. I braced myself for a howl or a growl, but nothing came out. Instead, its mouth just opened wider than should have been possible, revealing rows of teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. Not like a wolf's teeth at all. That broke the spell. Without a word, we both turned our bikes around and started pedaling. I've never ridden so fast in my life. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, the adrenaline making my whole body shake. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. Those white shapes bounding after us, or worse, somehow already ahead of us, waiting. We didn't stop until we reached Mike's house, which was closer. We practically threw our bikes on his front lawn and rushed inside, locking the door behind us. His parents were asleep, so we tried to keep quiet despite our panicked breathing. "What the hell was that?" Mike kept saying, pacing back and forth in his kitchen. "What the actual hell was that?" I couldn't answer him. I kept replaying the image in my mind. Those unnaturally white bodies, the way they sat at the edge of darkness. Those eyes that seemed to look through us rather than at us. We stayed up until dawn, talking in hushed voices, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We looked up local wildlife, paranormal sightings in the area, Native American legends, anything that might explain what we'd encountered. The closest we came was something about skinwalkers or wendigos from Native American folklore, but those were supposedly from the southwest or northern forests, not coastal Florida. By morning, exhaustion had set in, but neither of us wanted to sleep. Mike's mom found us zombied out on the couch, still in our clothes from the night before, staring blankly at our phones. "You boys okay?" she asked. We both nodded, mumbling something about losing track of time playing video games. What else could we say? "Oh, we just saw some supernatural wolf creatures last night that defied all explanation." She'd think we were on drugs. I went home around noon, taking the longest, most exposed route possible, staying on main roads with plenty of traffic. The daylight should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Those creatures had made me doubt everything I thought I knew about the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me tense up. I kept imagining those white shapes moving through my backyard, circling my house, waiting. I pulled my blinds shut tight and wedged a chair under my bedroom doorknob. The next day, Mike texted me asking if I wanted to go for another ride that night. I thought he was joking, but he was serious. He said we needed to go back to that spot to prove to ourselves that we'd just seen some big dogs or something. I refused at first, but after 3 days of barely sleeping, of jumping at shadows and feeling like I was losing my mind, I agreed. Maybe he was right. Maybe in the clarity of a new night, with our expectations set differently, we'd see that it was just a couple of stray dogs or someone walking their pets off leash. We met at the same corner earlier this time, around 10 p.m. We didn't bring music. We both had flashlights, and Mike had brought his dad's old baseball bat, strapped awkwardly to his bike frame. It should have been comical, but I was grateful for it. We approached Magnolia Street slowly, neither of us saying much. The street looked the same, lined with the same old houses, the same massive oaks creating the same shadows, but it felt different now. Charged somehow. We stopped about 100 feet from where we'd seen the creatures. The spot was empty now, just another patch of shadow between streetlights. "See?" Mike said, his voice too loud in the quiet night. "Nothing, just our imaginations going wild." I wasn't convinced. Something still felt off about the whole street, like we were being watched. "Let's get closer," Mike said, already pedaling forward. I followed reluctantly, my flashlight beam bouncing with every rotation of my wheels. We approached the spot where the creatures had been. Nothing, just empty sidewalk at the edge of the shadow cast by the two massive oaks. Mike let out a relieved laugh. "Man, we really freaked ourselves out, didn't we?" I was about to agree to let myself believe it had all been some shared hallucination when my flashlight caught something on the ground. I stopped my bike and pointed the beam directly at it. There, right at the edge where shadow met light, exactly where those creatures had sat, was a perfect circle of dead grass about 3 feet in diameter. The grass inside the circle wasn't just brown or wilted, it was completely desiccated, turned to dust. I reached down to touch it, and it crumbled between my fingers like ash. Mike saw it too. Without a word, he turned his bike around and started pedaling away. I followed immediately. We never went back to Magnolia Street after that. We still do our night rides sometimes, but we take a completely different route now, sticking to well-lit main roads with plenty of houses and traffic. I've spent countless hours researching what we might have seen. Nothing fits exactly. Whatever those creatures were, they weren't natural and they weren't accidents. They showed themselves to us deliberately, for reasons I still don't understand. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, the memory of those white shapes sitting at the edge of darkness so vivid, it's like they're in the room with me. I can still feel their eyes on me, still sense that unnatural awareness, and I wonder if maybe they're still out there, waiting at the boundary between light and dark, watching for someone else to ride past. Story 16. I've been hesitating about posting this for weeks, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can offer an explanation because I'm completely at a loss. I'm a medical examiner at Westville Regional Hospital. I've been working there for almost 8 years now, and I've always prided myself on being rational and level-headed. My job requires me to face death every day, to examine bodies and determine causes of death. I've seen all manner of tragic ends, from accidents to suicides to murders. Nothing really phases me anymore, or at least that's what I thought until what happened with Anna and her son, Tim. Anna was a colleague of mine. She worked in the same department, though she mostly handled the administrative side of things. We weren't particularly close, but we had a good professional relationship. She's a single mother with a 5-year-old son named Tim, a bright, cheerful little boy who occasionally visited the office when Anna couldn't find a babysitter. I never thought much about her home life until that day she came into work looking like she hadn't slept in days. It was about 3 weeks ago. I was finishing up some paperwork when Anna walked in, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking as she tried to pour herself a cup of coffee in the break room. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to be friendly. She jumped, spilling coffee on the counter. "God, Rachel, you scared me," she said, quickly grabbing some paper towels. She tried to laugh it off, but I could tell something was seriously wrong. "Sorry," I said. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really, no." She glanced around to make sure we were alone before continuing. Something really weird happened at my house a few nights ago. I can't stop thinking about it." I invited her to sit down, and that's when she told me everything. The story she shared sent chills down my spine, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling of dread since. It had happened the previous Friday. Anna had stayed late at the morgue to finish some paperwork, ironically, the same thing I was doing when we had this conversation. She said she got home around 11:30 at night. Her husband John was already asleep, as he had an early shift at the factory the next morning. The first thing Anna noticed when she got home was that Tim's bedroom door was open. This immediately struck her as odd because they had installed a child-proof door handle cover specifically to prevent Tim from wandering around at night. He was too short to reach the regular handle and hadn't yet figured out how to operate the child guard. Anna said she peeked into Tim's room and saw him sleeping peacefully in his bed. She assumed John must have checked on him earlier and forgotten to close the door properly. She went in, kissed Tim on the forehead, and closed the door behind her before heading to her own bedroom. John was half awake when she got into bed. She mentioned Tim's door being open and John insisted he had closed it before going to bed. They chalked it up to one of them forgetting and didn't think much more of it. Around 3 in the morning, Anna and John were jolted awake by Tim running into their bedroom, crying hysterically. It took them several minutes to calm him down enough to understand what was wrong. Tim kept saying there was a big man in his room, a man with a hat and glowing eyes who had told him to go away. Anna and John assumed it was just a nightmare, but Tim was adamant that it was real. He refused to go back to his room, so they let him sleep in their bed for the rest of the night. The next morning, while Tim was eating breakfast, Anna remembered that they had a baby monitor in Tim's room that recorded video. They had kept using it even though Tim was 5 because he sometimes had night terrors, and they wanted to be able to check on him without going into his room and potentially waking him. Anna decided to look through the footage from the night before, just to reassure Tim that there had been no one in his room. What she found made her blood run cold. The footage showed Tim sleeping peacefully in his bed, the nightlight casting a soft glow in the corner of the room. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, the door to Tim's bedroom slowly swung open. The hallway light was on, so the doorway was clearly illuminated. But there was no one there, no person, no shadow, nothing that could have pushed the door open. The door remained open for about 2 minutes. Then, the footage showed Tim suddenly turning in his bed as if responding to something. His lips moved. He was clearly speaking to someone, but the audio on the monitor was too low to pick up what he was saying. A few seconds later, Tim sat bolt upright in bed, his eyes wide with fear. He scrambled out of bed and ran out of the room, presumably to his parents' bedroom. Anna showed me the video on her phone. I watched it several times, looking for any explanation. A draft, the house settling, anything that could explain the door opening on its own. But there was nothing. It opened slowly and deliberately, as if pushed by an invisible hand. What really disturbed me was Tim's reaction, the way he turned in bed as if someone had called his name, the way he seemed to be talking to someone we couldn't see, and then that sudden terror, the desperate flight from his room. Since that night, Anna told me, strange things had been happening in their house. Objects moved from where they were placed, doors opened by themselves. Once, all the kitchen cabinets were found wide open in the morning, though everyone swore they had been closed the night before. Tim hadn't seen the man with the hat again, but he had started talking about a little girl who sometimes visited him. At first, Anna and John thought it was just an imaginary friend, a coping mechanism for the trauma of that night. But Tim insisted the girl was real, that she was hiding from the bad man. I asked Anna if they had considered moving. She nodded, saying they were already looking at houses in another town. But they both worked in Westville, and moving would mean long commutes or finding new jobs. Plus, they weren't sure if whatever was happening would follow them. As a medical examiner, I deal with death every day. I've seen bodies in various states of decay. I've performed autopsies on victims of horrible crimes. None of that scares me. But this inexplicable intrusion into a child's bedroom, this entity that only Tim could see, this terrified me to my core. After Anna finished her story, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to offer a rational explanation. Maybe Tim had managed to open the door himself and forgot. Maybe he was sleepwalking, but I had seen the video. The door opened with no one visible, and Tim's reaction was too genuine, too terrified to be faked or misremembered. I suggested that Anna talk to someone who specialized in paranormal phenomena, though I felt silly even saying it. She nodded, saying they had already contacted a local paranormal investigator who was scheduled to visit their house that weekend. The next day, Anna didn't come to work. I texted her to see if everything was okay, but she didn't respond. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I started to get worried, especially after the story she had told me. On my lunch break, I decided to drive by her house. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she had probably just taken a sick day and turned off her phone to rest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I arrived at Anna's house, everything looked normal from the outside. Their car was in the driveway. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I was about to leave when I noticed the front door wasn't fully closed. It was ajar, just slightly, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgot to pull it shut. I called out Anna's name, then John's, then Tim's. No response. The silence was unnerving. I pushed the door open wider and stepped into the hallway. "Hello? Anna, it's Rachel from work. Is everything okay?" The house was eerily quiet. I walked further in, towards the living room. Everything looked normal, no signs of a struggle or break-in. But it felt wrong somehow. The air was heavy, almost oppressive. I heard a sound from upstairs, a soft thud, like something being dropped. "Anna?" I called again, my voice sounding too loud in the silent house. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding. The upstairs hallway was dark despite it being midday. All the doors were closed, except one. Tim's bedroom door was wide open. I approached cautiously, calling Anna's name again. When I reached the doorway, I looked inside. The room was empty. Tim's bed was neatly made, his toys put away. But on the wall opposite the door, written in what looked like crayon, were the words, "He made us go away." I backed out of the room, fumbling for my phone to call the police. As I turned, I caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror, a tall figure wearing what looked like an old-fashioned hat. But when I spun around, there was nothing there. I ran out of that house as fast as I could and called 911 from my car. The police conducted a thorough search, but there was no sign of Anna, John, or Tim. Their car was still in the driveway, their phones were still in the house, and there was no indication of forced entry or struggle. It was as if they had simply vanished. The investigation is ongoing, but so far there are no leads. The police suspect foul play, of course. They've been questioning neighbors, checking bank records, the usual procedure. But I know what I saw in that mirror. I know what Anna told me about the entity in Tim's room. I keep replaying Anna's story in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done. Should I have believed her immediately? Should I have insisted they leave the house that very day? Would it have made any difference? I can't sleep at night anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see that tall figure in the hat, standing in Anna's hallway, and I can't stop thinking about those words on Tim's wall. He made us go away. I don't know what happened to Anna and her family. I don't know if they'll ever be found, but I know that something was in that house with them, something that isn't human, and I'm terrified that by entering that house, by seeing that figure in the mirror, I've somehow drawn its attention to me. Last night, I woke up at exactly 2:47 in the morning. My bedroom door, which I had closed and locked before going to bed, was standing wide open. Story 17. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this. Part of me wants to forget everything that happened, but another part needs to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. Last year, I moved to Kyoto for work. I'd always loved the city's blend of modern and traditional, and when I found an affordable rental in a Meiji-era house, I jumped at the opportunity. The rent was suspiciously cheap for such a beautiful old place, but I was 23, broke, and desperate for my own space. The house was tucked away in one of those narrow streets that snake through Kyoto's older districts. 2 stories, wooden structure, with those traditional sliding doors and tatami mats in most rooms. The landlord, an elderly man named Tanaka-san, seemed eager to rent it out. He mentioned casually that the house had never been a family home, always a rental property with detailed guest records going back decades. I should have asked more questions about why no one stayed long, but I was too excited about the carved wooden details and the small garden in the back. I moved in on a Thursday. That first night was fine, just the usual creaks of an old house settling. But by Saturday morning, things started to feel off. I was unpacking some books when I heard scratching coming from inside the wall. Not like a mouse or rat. This was more deliberate, almost like fingernails slowly dragging across the inside of the plaster. When I stopped to listen, it stopped too. When I resumed unpacking, it started again. This happened 3 more times until I said out loud, "Hello?" The scratching immediately stopped and didn't return that day. I tried to brush it off as the house settling or maybe some weird plumbing issue. Old houses make noises, right? But the following night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of a door slamming shut. It was so loud and clear that I sat bolt upright, heart racing. I lived alone. All the windows were closed. There was no wind, nothing that could have caused a door to slam. I turned on every light in the house and checked every room. All doors were exactly as I'd left them before going to bed. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next few days were quiet, and I started to think I'd imagined everything. Then came the knocking. I was washing dishes when I heard 3 distinct knocks on the wall beside me. Thinking it might be a neighbor, I knocked back 3 times. After a pause, whatever was on the other side knocked 4 times. My skin prickled. I knocked 4 times. It knocked 5. This went on until I reached 10 knocks, then stopped abruptly. I stood frozen at the sink, water still running over my hands, too afraid to continue the conversation. I began avoiding certain parts of the house. The upstairs area had a small room that had probably been used for storage. It was always uncomfortably warm, even when the rest of the house was cool. I had to go up there occasionally to use the washing machine that had been installed in a makeshift laundry area. One afternoon, while folding clothes, I distinctly heard a woman's voice whisper something in Japanese directly into my right ear. The words were too soft to make out, but the voice was unmistakably female, middle-aged maybe. I dropped the shirt I was holding and ran downstairs, refusing to go back up for the rest of the day. I started researching the history of my house online, but found almost nothing. Just some old photos showing it had been there since at least the early 1900s. I posted on a local forum asking if anyone knew anything about the property. Most responses were just jokes about me having a zashiki warashi, a child house spirit that brings good fortune. But one comment caught my attention. Someone wrote, "That house on Ginkakuji Street, no one stays there long. Ask about the register." I remembered Tanaka-san mentioning guest records. When I called him about an unrelated plumbing issue, I casually asked about them. He seemed uncomfortable, but eventually admitted they were stored in a wooden box in the upstairs closet, the same closet I'd been avoiding. He said previous tenants had sometimes added their experiences to the records, a tradition that started in the 1930s. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to check that closet. Inside was a dusty wooden box filled with notebooks of different ages. The oldest was from 1932, the pages yellowed and brittle. My Japanese reading skills weren't great, but I could make out enough. People described similar experiences: scratching noises, knocking, doors opening and closing, a woman's voice. Some entries were just a few lines, others several pages of detailed encounters. No one had stayed longer than 8 months. The next morning, around 5 a.m., something started banging on my bedroom window. Not tapping, banging like someone desperately trying to get in. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor with no balcony or tree nearby. Nothing could have reached that window. I pulled the covers over my head, too terrified to look. The banging continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. When I finally got the courage to look, there was nothing there. Not even a shadow or silhouette against the early morning light. I almost moved out that day, but apartments in Kyoto aren't easy to find mid-lease, and I couldn't afford to break my contract. Instead, I called my friend Yuki, who'd always been interested in spiritual things. She agreed to come stay for the weekend. Big mistake. With Yuki there, everything intensified. The knocking became more frequent. The scratching sounds moved from inside the walls to under the tatami mats. The upstairs got so hot we could barely breathe up there, despite it being autumn and quite cool outside. Yuki confirmed something was there. She said she could feel a presence, particularly in the rooms I'd been avoiding upstairs. She suggested we try to communicate with it directly. I was reluctant, but she convinced me it might help establish boundaries with whatever was sharing my space. We set up a small table with a candle and sat quietly, Yuki speaking softly in Japanese, asking if anyone was there and if they wanted to communicate. Nothing happened for about 20 minutes. Then the temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air. The candle flame grew taller, almost reaching 6 inches high without flickering, then abruptly went out. Yuki looked pale, but insisted we continue. She suggested we explore more of the house, including the storage areas I'd been avoiding. As we approached the back storage room, we heard a loud rattling sound like someone shaking furniture. When we opened the door, the sound stopped. The room was empty except for some old boxes and a standing mirror in the corner. Yuki stepped inside first. The rattling started again, this time accompanied by a low rumbling, almost like a growl. It seemed to be coming from all around us, not from any specific direction. The sound had a distinct quality to it, not angry exactly, but displeased, as if we were intruding. That's when it happened. The mirror, a full-length antique with a wooden frame, slowly turned away from us. Not fell over, not shifted slightly, but rotated on its base about 45 degrees, as if someone was deliberately turning it to face the wall. We both saw it. There was no draft, no vibration, nothing that could explain the movement. We ran out of the house and spent the night at a manga cafe. When we returned the next morning, the house was completely silent. The mirror was back in its original position. The upstairs rooms were cool again. It was as if whatever had been active was now resting or waiting. Yuki left that afternoon, making me promise to update her daily. She suggested I try to establish a respectful relationship with whatever was in the house. It doesn't seem malevolent, she said, just territorial. Maybe it's been there so long it considers this its home. Against my better judgment, I stayed. I started documenting everything online, partly as a record in case something happened to me, partly to get advice from others who might have experienced similar things. I began referring to it as my house ghost, and strangely, the more I acknowledged its presence, the less threatening the activity became. The scratching continued but seemed less aggressive. The knocking became almost predictable, always 3 knocks to start, always around the same times of day. The door slamming happened exactly once a week, always on Sunday night at 11 p.m. It was as if we were establishing a routine together. I began to feel that the presence was female. I can't explain why, just an intuition. Sometimes I'd come home to find small objects moved slightly, not hidden or thrown, just repositioned. My hairbrush would be on the opposite side of my dresser. A coffee mug would be turned with the handle facing the other direction. Never anything broken or damaged. I even started talking to her sometimes, especially when home alone at night. "I'm just going to watch some TV now," I'd say out loud. "I hope the noise doesn't bother you." Or, "I'm having friends over tomorrow afternoon. They'll be respectful of the house, I promise." One night, I even asked online for name suggestions for my house ghost lady. People thought I was joking or losing my mind, but it felt important somehow to acknowledge her as an individual presence, rather than just a generic haunting. That's when things escalated again. I'd been in the house about 2 months at this point. I woke up one night to find all the doors in the house, every single interior door, standing wide open. I distinctly remembered closing my bedroom door before sleeping, as I always did. The others I couldn't be sure about, but the bathroom door definitely should have been closed. As I walked through the house closing doors, I heard that voice again, the woman's voice, this time clear enough to make out 2 words, "Watashi no," which means my or mine in Japanese. Just those 2 words, spoken softly but distinctly from the top of the stairs. I froze, staring up into the darkness of the 2nd floor. "Your what?" I whispered. "Your house? Is that what you're saying?" The banging started then, not on the window this time, but on every wall around me, as if someone was running around the outside of the house, pounding with both fists. It was so loud I had to cover my ears. The floorboards vibrated beneath my feet. A framed print fell off the wall and shattered. Through it all, I felt watched. Not from any particular direction, from everywhere at once. The air felt thick, almost solid, pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe properly. Couldn't think, could only stand there as the banging continued for what must have been at least 5 minutes. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the noise. In that silence, I heard soft footsteps crossing the floor above me, deliberate, unhurried steps that made the old floorboards creak in sequence. They moved from one end of the house to the other, then stopped directly above where I stood. I still don't know how I found the courage, but I called up, "I respect that this was your house first. I'm not trying to take it from you. Can't we share it?" The response was immediate, a single, loud knock that shook dust from the ceiling. Not aggressive this time, almost affirming. That was 4 months ago. I'm still here in this house, still sharing it with whoever or whatever was here first. The phenomena haven't stopped, but they've settled into a pattern I can almost predict. The knocking comes at specific times. The scratching only happens when I'm alone. Doors still open and close sometimes, but never when I have visitors. I found more information in those old guest records. Apparently, in the 1920s, a woman lived here alone for several years, unusual for that time. She was a teacher at a local school who never married. After she died, the records don't say how, the house was converted to a rental property. That's when the strange occurrences began. I've started leaving small offerings in the upstairs room. Nothing elaborate, just a cup of tea sometimes, or a flower from the garden. They're always untouched when I check later, but the knocking is always gentler on days when I leave something. Yesterday, while doing laundry upstairs, I distinctly felt someone brush past me, so close that the sleeve of my sweater moved as if caught on something. There was a faint scent of plum blossoms, just for a moment, then nothing. I don't know what to make of all this. I don't know if I'll stay when my lease is up next month. Part of me wants to run far away from this place and never look back. But another part feels strangely connected to this house and its resident spirit, like we've formed some kind of unusual bond over these months. The knocking has started again as I write this. 3 distinct knocks on the wall beside me. I should be used to it by now, but my heart still races every time. I'm going to knock back, our usual pattern. What else can I do? Story 18. I still can't sleep when it snows. It's been 15 years since that night in Columbus, but every time I see those first flakes falling, my chest tightens up and I have to remind myself to breathe. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family. I guess I'm hoping putting it down might help me make sense of it, but I doubt it. Growing up in Columbus, Georgia meant snow was a rare event. We'd get a dusting every few years that would melt by noon. But in January of 2008, we got hit with an actual snowstorm, at least by Georgia standards. Maybe 3 or 4 inches, but for us, it was like the apocalypse. Schools closed, grocery stores emptied, and everyone panicked like the world was ending. Our house was this old 2-story place built sometime in the 1800s. The heating was garbage, just a few wall units and the fireplace in the living room. My dad had been drinking since noon. Not unusual for him on weekends, and by evening he was in that sweet spot between happy drunk and mean drunk. The temperature was dropping fast and we realized we didn't have enough firewood inside to last the night. "Come on," he said, grabbing his coat. "Let's get this done before it gets any colder." I was 13, wearing 2 hoodies under my coat because we couldn't afford proper winter clothes. The snow was still falling as we trudged to the woodpile behind the garage. Our property sat at the bottom of a gentle slope, and at the top of the hill was this old funeral home that had been there since forever. Nobody liked living near it, but we couldn't afford to be picky. Dad was carrying the flashlight, swinging it around as he walked, the beam cutting through the darkness and catching snowflakes as they fell. I had my arms full of logs, the bark scratching through my gloves, my fingers already numb from cold. That's when I saw it, a small figure standing at the edge of our property, where our yard met the funeral home's land. At first I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe one of those lawn ornaments, but then it moved. "Dad," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. "Look, there's someone up there." He turned, pointing the flashlight toward where I was looking. The beam caught what looked like a small boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, standing perfectly still in the snow. He was wearing what looked like a white nightgown, the kind from old-timey photos, and nothing else. No coat, no shoes, nothing. Just standing there, snow collecting on his shoulders and head. Jesus Christ, my dad muttered, suddenly sounding a lot more sober. "Hey, kid, what the hell are you doing out here?" The boy didn't answer. He just stood there, arms at his sides, looking in our direction. "He's gonna freeze to death," I said, already feeling sick at the thought of a kid out in this weather wearing next to nothing. Dad started walking toward him, and I followed. As we got closer, I could see the boy more clearly. His skin was so pale it almost glowed in the darkness. His hair was dark, plastered to his head with melting snow, and he was shivering violently, his whole body trembling like he was about to shake apart. "Hey, buddy," my dad said, his voice gentler than I'd heard it in months. "You lost? Where'd you come from?" The boy just stared at us with these huge, dark eyes. Up close, his lips had a bluish tint, and his nightgown was soaked through. I remember thinking he must be absolutely freezing, but he wasn't crying or making any noise at all, just shaking. "We need to get him inside," I told my dad, already shrugging off one of my hoodies. Dad nodded. "What's your name, son? Where are your folks?" "Nothing." The boy just kept staring, his eyes moving between us. I held out my hoodie, but he made no move to take it. "Come on," Dad said, not touching the boy, but gesturing toward our house. "Come get warm. We'll figure out where you belong." To my surprise, the boy nodded slightly. He followed us, walking a few steps behind, his bare feet leaving impressions in the snow. I kept looking back, worried he might collapse or run off, but he just kept following, arms wrapped around himself, shivering non-stop. Our back door led straight into the kitchen. Dad ushered the boy inside first, then me, then closed the door against the cold. The warmth of the house hit me like a wall, and I realized how frozen my face had become in just those few minutes outside. "I'll get some blankets," Dad said, setting down the few logs he'd managed to carry. "Get him by the fire." I led the boy to the living room where the fireplace was still burning low. "You can sit here," I said, pointing to the couch closest to the hearth. "We'll get you warmed up." That's when I noticed something strange. The boy had stopped shivering, completely. One second he was trembling like a leaf, and the next he was perfectly still. His expression had changed too. The fear or confusion or whatever had been there before was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. He sat on the edge of the couch, his wet nightgown leaving a dark spot on the cushion. His bare feet didn't quite reach the floor. Up close in the firelight, there was something off about his skin. It wasn't just pale, it had this waxy quality to it, like a candle. "What's your name?" I tried again. "Do your parents know you're out?" The boy looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the flames, but said nothing. He smiled slightly, just the corners of his mouth turning up. It wasn't a kid's smile. It was the kind of smile adults give when they know something you don't. Dad came back with an armload of blankets and our ancient cordless phone. "Here we go, buddy. Let's get you warm, and then we'll call someone to come get you. Your folks must be worried sick." The boy's eyes flicked to my dad, then back to the fire. I reached for one of the blankets to wrap around his shoulders. "I'm gonna put some more wood on the fire," Dad said, turning toward the fireplace. "Then we'll figure out—" The sentence died in his throat because when we both turned back, the boy was gone. Not hiding, not in another room, completely gone. The blanket I'd been about to hand him drifted to the floor. The wet spot on the couch was the only evidence he'd been there at all. "What the hell?" Dad spun around, checking behind the couch, under the coffee table. "Where'd he go?" I ran to the kitchen, thinking maybe he'd sneaked out, but the back door was still locked from the inside. The front door, too. We searched every room in the house, calling out to him, checking closets, under beds, everywhere a kid might hide. Nothing. "Did you hear the door? Any doors?" Dad asked, his face pale now, too. I shook my head. "No," and I was right there. He couldn't have just— "Get your coat," Dad said, already pulling his own back on. Maybe he got scared and ran back outside. We went out the back door, flashlights sweeping across the yard. The snow was still falling, but lighter now. Our footprints from earlier were already filling in, but they were still visible. 2 sets of adult-sized prints going to the woodpile, then 3 sets coming back to the house. Only 3 sets. 2 large, 1 small. No small footprints leading away from the house. "That's not possible," Dad whispered, the beam of his flashlight trembling as he moved it back and forth across the undisturbed snow surrounding our house. We circled the entire property. Nothing. Not a single footprint that couldn't be accounted for. It was like the boy had simply vanished into thin air. Dad started drinking heavily after we came back inside. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the windows, expecting to see that small figure standing in our yard, staring up at the house. But there was nothing. The next morning, the snow had stopped. School was still cancelled, so I walked over to old Mrs. Funderburk's house. She'd lived in the neighborhood for over 70 years and knew all the local history. When I described what had happened, leaving out my dad's drinking, she went very still. Her eyes got wide behind her thick glasses, and she crossed herself, something I'd never seen her do before. "You saw him," she said softly. "The Chilton boy." According to Mrs. Funderburk, back in 1882, during one of the rare Georgia snowstorms, a boy named Thomas Chilton had wandered out of his house in the middle of the night. His family lived where the funeral home now stands. They found him the next morning, frozen to death in the snow, wearing nothing but his nightgown. No one knew why he'd gone outside or how long he'd been out there before he died. "People have seen him over the years," Mrs. Funderburk told me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always during snow, always at night, just standing there watching. Some say he's looking for his way home. Others say—" She trailed off, staring into her teacup. "Others say, what?" I prompted. "Others say he's looking for warmth, that he's drawn to the living, to their heat, that he follows them home sometimes." I felt cold despite the multiple layers I was wearing. But he disappeared. How could he just disappear? Mrs. Funderburk shook her head. "He was never really there, child. Not in the way you and I are here. I didn't believe in ghosts. Still don't really. But I can't explain what happened that night. The boy in the snow, the absence of footprints leading away from our house, the strange way he'd stopped shivering the moment he entered our home. Dad and I never talked about it again, not directly, but for years after, whenever it snowed, those rare Georgia snows, he'd make sure all the doors were locked before sunset, and he'd build a fire, even if it wasn't that cold. Just in case, he'd mutter, arranging the logs carefully. Just in case he gets cold again. I moved away from Columbus as soon as I could, went to college up north where snow is common. I thought distance and frequency might dull the memory, make it less terrifying. It didn't work. Every snowfall still makes me think of that pale boy in the wet nightgown, his bare feet in the snow, the way he smiled at me in the firelight. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, I catch myself looking out the window, half expecting to see a small silhouette standing in my yard, waiting to be invited in, and I wonder, if I did see him again, what would happen if I opened the door. Story 19. I've never told anyone about this before. It's been 6 years since it happened, but I still wake up at night sometimes. The image of that little boy burned into my mind. I know how this is going to sound, but I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to share actually happened. It was the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. My mom and I were living in this old 2-story house in Westfield that had been in our family for decades. My grandfather grew up there, and it eventually passed to my mom after my grandparents died. It was a nice enough place, I guess. Big yard, quiet street, that kind of thing. But there was always something a bit off about it. The floors creaked too much at night. The lights would flicker for no reason, just little things that you could easily explain away. At the time, my mom was dating this guy, Marcus. They'd been together for about 8 months. He was okay, I suppose. Worked construction, treated my mom well enough, always tried to bond with me over sports and stuff. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had this intensity sometimes, especially when he talked about things he believed in. Marcus was super into the paranormal, like really into it. He'd watch those ghost hunting shows for hours, had all these books about spirits and hauntings. My mom thought it was harmless, even cute sometimes. I just found it weird. He was always telling us stories about encounters he'd had, shadow people in his childhood home, voices he'd heard when nobody was around, that kind of stuff. I never believed any of it. That night in July, it was ungodly hot. Our AC was on the fritz, and my bedroom upstairs was like an oven. I grabbed my pillow and a sheet and headed down to crash on the couch in the living room where it was a bit cooler. Marcus was staying over that night, but they were up in my mom's room. I remember checking my phone before I dozed off. It was around midnight. I fell asleep pretty quickly despite the heat. I don't know exactly what woke me up later, but suddenly I was wide awake. You know that feeling when you just know something's not right? My whole body felt heavy, like there was this pressure pushing down on me. The digital clock on the cable box read 3:17 a.m. Our living room had this big bay window that faced the front yard. The blinds were mostly closed, but there was a gap at the bottom where they didn't quite reach the windowsill. From where I was lying on the couch, I could see a slice of the front yard through that gap. That's when I noticed something moving out there. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the trees or something, but then I realized it was too solid, too deliberate in its movements. I froze, unable to move, as this figure came into full view through the gap in the blinds. It was a kid, a little boy, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. He was wearing what looked like an old-style baseball uniform, not modern, more like something from the 50s or 60s. The whole outfit was this weird ashen gray color, like all the color had been leached out of it. His skin was pale, almost bluish in the moonlight, but it was his eyes that made my blood run cold. They were wrong. Hollow isn't even the right word. It was like looking into empty space, but somehow, despite that emptiness, they also conveyed this overwhelming sadness, like this kid had seen things no child should ever see, felt pain no one should ever feel. He was just standing there in our front yard, staring directly at me, not at the house, not at the window, at me. Like he knew exactly where I was lying on that couch, like he could see right through the blinds. I couldn't move, I couldn't even blink. It felt like someone had turned off all the switches in my brain that controlled my muscles. All I could do was lie there, staring back at this ghost, spirit, whatever it was, as cold sweat soaked through my shirt. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt warped. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. "James? You awake?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper as he entered the living room. I couldn't even turn my head to look at him. My eyes were still locked with the boy outside. Marcus must have noticed something was wrong because he came closer. "Hey, what's up with..." He stopped mid-sentence. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "You see him too." Not a question, a statement that broke whatever spell had been holding me. I managed to turn my head to look at Marcus. He was standing there in his boxers and t-shirt, staring out the window at the boy. His face was pale, but he didn't look scared. He looked, I don't know, almost resigned, like he'd been expecting this. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Marcus didn't answer me. Instead, he walked over to the window, and to my absolute horror, he pulled the blinds up completely. The boy was still there, staring up at us. Now I could see him clearly. His baseball uniform had a number on it, 14, but no team name. His hair was dark and neatly combed to one side. There was dirt on his face and uniform, like he'd been sliding into bases. But everything about him was just slightly off, like a photo that's been badly edited. And then Marcus did something I still can't believe. He unlocked the window and opened it. "Hey there," he said to the boy, his voice gentle but firm. "What are you doing here so late?" I wanted to scream at him to shut the window, to call the police, to do anything other than talk to this thing like it was normal, but I still couldn't move from the couch. The boy didn't speak. He just kept staring, those hollow yet sad eyes now fixed on Marcus. You looking for something? Marcus asked. Someone? The boy tilted his head slightly, almost like a confused puppy. It was such a human gesture from something that felt so inhuman that it made my stomach turn. You can't stay here, Marcus continued. You know that, right? This isn't your place anymore. I swear the air in the room got colder. I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face, despite it being July in Westfield. The boy raised one arm and pointed at me, not aggressively, more like he was asking a question without words. Marcus shook his head. No, he can't help you either. Nobody here can. You need to move on. For a second, I thought I saw a tear roll down the boy's pale cheek, but it could have been a trick of the moonlight. Go on now, Marcus said, his voice softer. It's time. The boy lowered his arm. He stood there for another moment, those empty eyes somehow managing to convey such profound sadness that I felt it in my chest like a physical ache. Then, without any sound at all, he turned and started walking across our front yard. I found the strength to get up and join Marcus at the window. We watched as the boy walked away, his small figure getting harder to see the further he went. He didn't vanish in a puff of smoke or anything dramatic like that. He just kept walking until he was too far away to see anymore, disappearing into the darkness beyond our street. Marcus closed the window and locked it, then pulled the blinds back down. What ... I started, my voice barely audible. What the fuck was that? Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. His palm was ice cold. Go back to sleep, James, he said. Everything's fine now. Fine? Are you kidding me? That was... I said go back to sleep. His voice had an edge to it I'd never heard before. We can talk about it in the morning if you want. But we never did talk about it. The next morning, Marcus was gone before I woke up. Had to be at a job site early, my mum said, and I couldn't bring myself to mention it to her. What would I even say? Hey Mom, I saw a ghost kid last night and your boyfriend had a chat with him. 2 weeks later, we moved out of that house. Mom said the place needed too many repairs, that it wasn't worth keeping anymore. Marcus helped us find a newer place across town. I didn't argue. About a month after we moved, I finally worked up the courage to ask Marcus about that night. We were alone watching a baseball game on TV. Hey, remember that night at the old house with the kid outside the window? He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. What are you talking about? The little boy in the baseball uniform. You saw him too. You talked to him. Marcus laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sounds like you had one hell of a dream, kid. Too many horror movies before bed, probably. It wasn't a dream. You were there. You said you see him too. He shook his head, still smiling that fake smile. James, I think I'd remember something like that. Must have been a really vivid dream. I wanted to argue, to remind him of every detail, but something in his expression stopped me. It was like a door closing, a warning, so I dropped it, laughed it off, said yeah, must have been a dream, but it wasn't a dream. I know what I saw, what I felt, the weight of those hollow, sad eyes staring into mine. The cold that filled the room when Marcus opened that window. The way the boy pointed at me. My mom and Marcus broke up about a year later. Last I heard, he moved to another state. We never talked about that night again. I've done research since then. Turns out our old house was built in the 1960s, on land that used to be part of a community baseball field. I couldn't find any records of accidents or deaths there, though. No missing children reports that match the boy I saw. I still don't know what I witnessed that night. Was it really a ghost? Was Marcus somehow messing with me? Was it actually just a dream so vivid that I can't separate it from reality? All I know is that sometimes I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. for no reason at all, and for a split second before I fully wake up, I swear I can feel those hollow, sad eyes watching me through my bedroom window, waiting for something, asking for something, and I still have no idea what he wants. Story 20. I've been driving big rigs for almost 20 years now, and I've seen some weird shit on the road. Hallucinations from sleep deprivation, crazy weather phenomena, even some close calls with drunk drivers that still make my hands shake when I think about them. But what happened to me 3 months ago on I-90, I still can't explain it. I haven't told many people because, well, who the hell would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest. I was hauling a load of furniture from Boston to Seattle, a long haul that I'd done dozens of times before. The company I work for was short-staffed that week, so I volunteered to take the run. The money was good, and I needed to save up for my daughter's college fund anyway. Everything was normal for the first day. I made decent time, stopping only for fuel, bathroom breaks, and a quick lunch. I wanted to push through and make it as far as possible before I had to rest. By the time night fell, I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere on Interstate 90, with nothing but darkness stretching out ahead of me and behind me. The clock on my dashboard read 1:15 a.m. when things started getting weird. I was just settling in with a fresh thermos of coffee, mentally calculating how much farther I could go before I'd need to pull over at a rest stop for a few hours of sleep. My GPS had been working fine all day, guiding me along the familiar route. But suddenly the screen froze. At first, I didn't think much of it. Technology fails sometimes, and I knew the route well enough anyway. But then my CB radio crackled to life. I hadn't been using it much on this trip. Not many truckers use them these days with all the smartphones and stuff, but I keep mine on out of habit. There was this burst of static, and then a voice came through, faint and sort of distorted. "Don't stop," it said. "Whatever you do, don't stop." I sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "Come again?" I said into the radio, but there was no response, just more static. I figured it was probably some prankster or maybe interference from another channel. Still, something about that voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded urgent, desperate even. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They were far behind me at first, just tiny pinpricks of light in the darkness, but they were gaining on me fast, way too fast for a vehicle that size. Within minutes, the headlights were right behind me, blinding me with their intensity. It was another truck, a big rig like mine, and it was riding my ass so close I couldn't even see its grill. I tapped my brakes, hoping the driver would back off, but they stayed glued to me. "Back off, asshole," I muttered, increasing my speed a little. The speed limit was 70, and I was already doing 75, but I pushed it up to 80. The truck behind me matched my speed perfectly, still tailgating. Now I was getting pissed off. This wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. If I had to brake suddenly, this idiot would plow right into me. I grabbed my CB again. "Hey, driver behind me on I-90 eastbound, you want to back off a little? You're running too close." Nothing but static answered me. Then the truck started to pull out, moving into the passing lane. I glanced at my side mirror, watching as it drew alongside me. It was an older model, a Peterbilt with a faded logo on the door that I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. Its high beams were still on, and they were pointed right at me, making it hard to see. I turned my head to look at the driver, ready to give them a piece of my mind, but what I saw made my blood run cold. There was no one there. The cab was empty. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from fatigue. Maybe the driver was just slumped down or leaning over to grab something. But no. The interior lights were on in the cab, illuminating the empty driver's seat clear as day. The truck was driving itself, keeping perfect pace with me at 80 miles per hour. I nearly drove off the road right then and there. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and my heart was pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I forced myself to look forward, focusing on the road ahead, convinced that when I looked back, there would be a driver there. Had to be. But when I glanced back, the cab was still empty, and now the truck was pulling ahead of me, its tail lights growing brighter as it increased its lead. Panic hit me like a sledgehammer. I stomped on the accelerator, pushing my rig to 85, then 90. I knew I was being reckless, but some primal part of my brain was screaming that I needed to get away from that thing, whatever it was. The ghost truck, I couldn't think of any other way to describe it, matched my speed effortlessly. For several terrifying minutes, we raced down the empty highway, my hands sweating so much I could barely grip the wheel. Then, without warning, the truck veered sharply to the right. I braced myself for the sound of a crash, but there was nothing. No screech of tires, no crunch of metal, not even the sound of the engine. The truck simply drove off the highway into the darkness and vanished, like it had never been there at all. I kept driving for another 20 minutes, my mind racing even faster than my truck. What the hell had I just seen? Was I losing it? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing? But no, I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my shirt sticking to my back with cold sweat. Eventually, I spotted a truck stop ahead, its neon sign a welcome beacon in the night. I needed to stop, to collect myself, maybe grab some coffee and convince myself I wasn't going crazy. The truck stop was one of those old run-down places that have been around since before the interstate system, the kind with a small diner attached and not much else. There were a few trucks parked in the lot, but the place seemed eerily quiet for even that time of night. I parked and sat in my cab for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were still shaking as I climbed down and walked toward the diner. Inside, it was nearly empty. A tired-looking waitress was wiping down the counter, and there was a lone man sitting in a booth in the corner. Something about him caught my attention immediately. He was wearing a faded trucker's jacket, and as I got closer, I realized with a jolt that the logo on it was the same one I'd seen on the ghost truck, a stylized RT inside a circle. I froze in the middle of the diner, staring at him. He didn't look up, just sat there with his head down, a mug of coffee untouched in front of him. The waitress noticed me standing there and came over. "Coffee?" she asked in a low voice. I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the man in the booth. She poured me a cup, then leaned in close. "You should go," she whispered urgently. "If you saw it, you don't want to be here." My blood turned to ice. "Saw what?" I asked, but I already knew. She just shook her head, looking nervously at the man in the booth. "Just go, now." The man still hadn't moved or acknowledged my presence. He just sat there, motionless, like he was waiting for something or someone. I didn't need to be told twice. I left my coffee untouched, tossed a $5 bill on the counter, and hurried out of there. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed something I hadn't seen when I pulled in. All the trucks parked in the lot had the same faded RT logo as the ghost truck, and they all looked wrong somehow, covered in dust, like they'd been sitting there for years, not just overnight. A terrible realization crept over me as I climbed back into my rig. These trucks weren't just parked here, they were waiting, for me, for other drivers who had seen what I'd seen. I started my engine with shaking hands and pulled out of that truck stop like the devil himself was on my tail. I drove straight through until dawn, not daring to stop again until I was well away from that stretch of I-90. I completed my delivery in Seattle 2 days later, but I took a different route back east. I haven't driven on I-90 since that night, and I don't plan to ever again if I can help it. Every time I pass an old rig on the road now, especially at night, I can't help but glance at the driver's seat. Most of the time, there's someone there, just another trucker like me trying to make a living. But sometimes, just sometimes, I think I catch a glimpse of an empty cab or a faded RT logo, and my heart nearly stops. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. Maybe that waitress was in on some elaborate prank. But in my gut, I know it was real, and I know that somewhere out there on I-90, that ghost truck is still driving, looking for someone else to follow. The weird thing is, I looked up that RT logo when I got home. It belonged to Ridgeway Transport, a trucking company that went bankrupt in the 80s after one of their drivers fell asleep at the wheel and caused a massive pileup that killed 7 people, including himself. The accident happened on Interstate 90 at the exact spot where the ghost truck disappeared. I still drive for a living. I have to. It's all I know, and I've got bills to pay. But I'm more careful now about where I drive and when, and I never, ever ignore warnings on the CB radio. So if you're ever driving on I-90 late at night and you see headlights gaining on you too fast, or hear a static-filled voice telling you not to stop, listen to it. And whatever you do, don't look too closely at who's behind the wheel of the truck passing you, because some things on the road should remain unseen, and some drivers never reach their final destination, no matter how long they keep driving. Story 21. I still don't know what to make of what happened last month. I've always been a night owl, but this particular night changed everything about how I view my home. I've been living in Ravenswood Manor for about 8 months now. It's this old Victorian place my parents bought when I started college nearby. The rent is cheap for me, and they thought it would be a good investment property. Up until that night, I'd never experienced anything unusual here. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was having one of those nights where sleep just wouldn't come. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, scrolling through my phone, watching YouTube videos, anything to distract my racing mind. My stomach started growling, and I figured maybe that was the problem. I hadn't eaten much for dinner, just a small salad because I'd been running late for my evening class. I remember sliding out of bed, grabbing my phone for light, and heading downstairs. The house was dead quiet except for that annoying creak on the 3rd step from the bottom, the one I usually skip during the day but always forget about at night. The air felt cooler downstairs, which wasn't unusual for this old place with its terrible insulation. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I hesitated. I can't really explain why. It was like walking through an invisible cobweb. You know that feeling when something brushes against your skin, but there's nothing there. That's what it felt like passing through the kitchen doorway, a subtle but definite shift, like crossing some kind of threshold that wasn't visible but was definitely there. I flicked on the lights and squinted against the sudden brightness. Everything looked normal. Dishes in the drying rack from earlier, the succulent plant I was somehow keeping alive on the windowsill, the calendar with my exam dates circled in red. But something felt off, like when you walk into your apartment and can tell someone's been there, even though nothing's visibly different. I tried to shake it off. My roommate had moved out the previous month, and I wasn't used to being alone in the house yet. That had to be it, right? Just my imagination playing tricks on me because I was alone, and it was the middle of the night. I headed to the fridge, and the unease followed me. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was a physical sensation, like a heaviness in the air pressing against my skin. My hands felt clumsy as I grabbed the bread, cheese, and mayo. I dropped the knife twice while trying to spread the mayo. My heart was beating faster than it should have been for someone just making a midnight snack. The entire time, the feeling grew stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. The kitchen isn't that big, maybe 12 by 15 feet with an island in the middle, but suddenly it felt both too small and too large at the same time, like the corners were too far away to see properly. I remember thinking that I was being ridiculous. This was my kitchen in my house. I'd made hundreds of sandwiches here before, but my hands were shaking as I cut the sandwich in half, and I found myself avoiding looking at the window over the sink, which only showed my reflection against the darkness outside. The house settled with a groan. Old houses do that, I know, but this sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the entire structure was shifting around me. The lights flickered once, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach drop. I abandoned the idea of eating in the kitchen. I just wanted to get back upstairs to my room. I grabbed my plate and turned toward the door, and that's when it hit me. A wave of pure, undiluted fear. Not anxiety or nervousness, but the kind of fear that bypasses your conscious mind and goes straight to your lizard brain. My entire body went cold, and I broke out in goosebumps so intense they hurt. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a message, clear as day. Get out now. I've never experienced anything like it. It was like someone was screaming this warning directly into my mind. Every instinct I had was firing at once, telling me I was in immediate danger. My vision tunneled, focusing only on the kitchen doorway, my escape route. I didn't run, not yet, but I moved quickly, my muscles tense and ready to sprint. The plate in my hand was forgotten, and I think I dropped it on the island as I passed. The doorway seemed miles away, and with each step, the pressure in the room increased. The air felt thick, almost solid, like moving through gelatin. When I finally reached the doorway, I stepped through and pulled the door shut behind me without even thinking about it. It was pure instinct, like closing a barrier between myself and something terrible. The door clicked shut, and for a split second, I felt relief. That's when I heard it. A woman's scream erupted from the living room, so close and so loud that I physically felt the sound waves hit my body. It wasn't muffled or distant. It wasn't coming through walls or from outside. It was right there, as if someone was standing in the living room, no more than 15 feet away from me, screaming at the top of their lungs. It wasn't a scream of surprise or even fear. This was a scream of absolute terror and agony, the kind of sound a person makes when they're experiencing something so horrific that their mind breaks. It started high and piercing, then dropped into a guttural, animal-like howl that no human throat should be able to produce, and it kept going. Most screams last a second or two before the person needs to breathe. This one stretched on impossibly long, modulating and changing as if expressing every variation of human suffering. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I ran. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my feet barely touching the steps. I don't even remember the journey. One moment I was at the bottom of the stairs, and the next I was slamming my bedroom door shut and pushing my dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone. I called my friend Jess, who lived 10 minutes away. I couldn't form complete sentences, just fragments. Someone in the house, screaming, "Please come." She tried to convince me to call the police, but I was too terrified to talk to strangers. I just needed a familiar face. Jess arrived in record time with her boyfriend Mike. They came upstairs, helped me move the dresser, and did a full sweep of the house while I stood trembling in the hallway. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one hiding in closets or under beds. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it, sandwich ingredients still out, the plate with my half-made sandwich sitting on the island. The 3 of us sat in my room until sunrise, with me telling and retelling what had happened. Jess suggested it might have been a nightmare, but I hadn't been asleep. Mike thought maybe it was a neighbor or someone outside, but the scream had been too close, too present. It was in the house with me. The next day I asked the neighbors if they'd heard anything. No one had. I even checked local news to see if anything had happened nearby. Nothing. I couldn't stay there alone after that. I crashed at Jess's place for a week before finally forcing myself to return. I've been sleeping with all the lights on, and I haven't been downstairs after midnight since. What bothers me most isn't just the scream, though that was horrifying enough. It's the progression of it all. How it started with that subtle feeling of wrongness and built until it culminated in that inhuman cry. Like something was there watching me, and it wanted me to know it was there, like it was communicating with me in the only way it could, first with feelings, then with sound. I've researched the history of Ravenswood Manor since then. It was built in 1896 by a merchant who lost his fortune and hung himself in the attic in 1910. The house changed hands dozens of times over the years, with no family staying longer than a decade. There are no records of violent deaths or murders, though. Nothing that would explain what I experienced. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if I was just tired and stressed from exams and my mind conjured the whole thing. But then I remember the physical sensations, the heaviness in the air, the goosebumps, the way my ears rang for hours after hearing that scream. And I know it was real. I'm still living here. I can't afford to move out right now, but I've rearranged my bedroom so I don't have to look at the door while I'm trying to sleep. I keep my door locked, and I've put a chair under the handle, just in case. In case of what? I don't know. The thing is, I don't feel threatened exactly. Whatever it was could have hurt me if it wanted to. I was completely vulnerable. But it didn't. It just wanted me gone from that space at that moment, like I had interrupted something or trespassed somewhere I shouldn't have been. I haven't felt that presence since, but sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I swear I can hear something moving downstairs in the kitchen. Not footsteps exactly, but the subtle sounds of someone or something existing in that space. And I know, as certainly as I know my own name, that I am not alone in this house. Story 22. I've never told this story in full before. Even as I type this, I keep looking over my shoulder. It's not that I think they'll be angry I'm telling you. It's just habit now. When you live with what I live with, constantly checking the dark corners of rooms becomes second nature. I've seen them since I was a kid. The white faces and black shadows. They watch me, not in a threatening way most of the time, just observing, like I'm some kind of exhibit in their museum. The first time it happened, I was 5. I woke up in the middle of the night but couldn't move. My body felt like it was made of cement, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't even lift a finger. Then I saw them, 2 teenage girls standing at the foot of my bed, both wearing white nightgowns that seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. Next to them was an older woman, also in a white nightgown, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, and behind them all stood a man, tall, silent, just watching. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just laid there, terrified, until I eventually fell back asleep. When I told my parents the next morning, they said it was just a nightmare. Sleep paralysis, the doctor later called it. But I knew better. They were real. The man never came back after that night, but the others, they stayed. Last night was the worst it's been in years. I'd gone to bed around 11, exhausted from work. I'd barely closed my eyes when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a bell ringing. It wasn't loud, more like the delicate chime of a small handbell, but it was coming from inside my closet. That closet has always been a hot spot. I've seen her there countless times, a young girl just standing, watching. I've named her Abigail. Sometimes she looks sad, sometimes curious. Last night she was angry. The bell rang 3 times, and I froze. My room was pitch black except for the faint blue glow of my phone charger. I laid perfectly still, barely breathing, listening. Ring, ring, ring. I whispered, "Abigail?" My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. The ringing stopped, then my closet door creaked open, just an inch or 2. I've never been more terrified in my life. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I couldn't move. Not paralysis this time, just pure, undiluted fear. A small white hand appeared in the gap of the door. Not a child's hand exactly. The fingers were too long, the skin too pale. It rested there on the edge of the door for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the door slammed shut with such force that my water glass vibrated on the nightstand. I didn't sleep at all after that. This morning, I found a small silver bell on my kitchen counter. I don't own a bell. I've never owned a bell. But this is just one night in years of strange experiences in this house. I should probably start from the beginning. When we first moved here, I was 3. Too young to remember much, but my parents said I'd always talk to my friends in empty rooms. They thought it was cute. Just an imaginary friend phase. By the time I was 7, I knew better than to mention the people I saw. The way my parents looked at me, concerned, worried, made me keep it to myself. It wasn't just Abigail. There's another girl I call Abby. She's older than Abigail, maybe 13 or 14. She has long dark hair and always wears the same white nightgown. And then there's Charlie, a little boy of about 6, who I mostly see running down the hallway or peeking around corners. They've never hurt me. That's important to understand, but they've definitely made their presence known. About 2 years ago, I was in the shower. The bathroom door was locked, the house empty except for me. I was rinsing shampoo from my hair when I felt something poke my back through the shower curtain. Not hard, just a gentle prod, like a child trying to get my attention. I whipped around, nearly slipping on the wet tub floor, and yanked the curtain back. Nothing. No one. But the bathroom felt cold suddenly, despite the hot water still running, and I swear I heard a child's giggle. Another time, I was almost asleep when I felt a hand touch my back. Just a light touch, moving from between my shoulder blades down to the middle of my back. I spun around, heart pounding, empty room, but the spot where I'd been touched felt ice cold. My cousin stayed over once and refused to ever come back. He saw the man, the one I'd only seen that first time during my sleep paralysis episode. According to my cousin, he was standing in our backyard, just staring at the house. When my cousin blinked, the man was gone. That same night, my cousin heard voices, children's voices, coming from the empty guest room where he was staying. Just whispers at first, then clearer. Hello? Hi. Who are you? He was packed and gone before breakfast the next morning. The cats are different though. I lost both my cats last year. Handsome, my dark brown tabby, and Onyx, my black cat. They were both older and it wasn't unexpected, but it broke my heart. About a month after Onyx died, I started seeing shadows moving around the house, cat-shaped shadows. They'd dart across the floor just at the edge of my vision, or I'd see what looked like a cat jumping onto the couch from the corner of my eye. The strange thing is, these shadows bring me comfort. Sometimes at night, I feel the unmistakable weight of a cat jumping onto the foot of my bed, settling down. I know it's them, and unlike the human shadows, I'm glad they're here. The most unsettling presence isn't the children or even the older woman. It's what stands in the hallway connecting the bedrooms. I've only seen it a handful of times, but it's always the same. A figure with a white face. Not like human white, but literally white, like a mask. It has features, eyes, a nose, a mouth, but they don't look quite right. Too small, too symmetrical. It doesn't feel human to me, but oddly, it doesn't feel threatening either. It just watches. Last week I was up late working on my laptop. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater. Around 2 a.m, I got up to get some water. As I walked past the hallway, I saw it. The white-faced figure standing perfectly still. I stopped, and for the first time, I didn't immediately look away or run. I stared back. It tilted its head slightly, like it was curious. Then it raised one hand, not in a threatening way, more like a greeting. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Then the lights flickered once, and when they came back on, it was gone. I told myself I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The children are becoming more active lately. Last month I was cleaning out the spare room closet when I found a drawing tucked behind the baseboard. A crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, 2 tall, 1 small, a family. The paper looked old, yellowed at the edges. I don't know where it came from. I've never seen it before, and I live alone. When I showed it to my mom, she went pale. She said it looked exactly like the drawings I used to make as a child, but I have no memory of drawing it, and the paper was too old to be recent. I put it back where I found it. It felt wrong to take it. Yesterday morning, before the bell incident, I heard humming coming from the spare room, a children's song, something simple and old-fashioned. When I opened the door, the humming stopped. But the room was cold, so cold I could see my breath, and on the window, drawn in what looked like finger marks on the condensation, was a simple smiley face. I'm not making this up. I wish I was. Sometimes I wonder if I should move, just leave this place behind. But something tells me they might follow. Or worse, what if they're not attached to the house but to me? My cousin thinks I should get the house blessed, but I'm not sure. Most of the time they're just there, existing alongside me. It's only recently that things have escalated with the bell and the door. The older lady, I see her the least frequently of all of them, but when she does appear, it's always in the same spot, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down. Sometimes she seems sad, other times watchful. I've never felt threatened by her, just observed. As I'm writing this, I keep hearing soft footsteps upstairs, like a child running on tiptoes, back and forth, but I'm downstairs alone, all the doors locked. The bell is still on my counter. I don't know what to do with it. Throwing it away feels wrong somehow, disrespectful, but keeping it feels like an invitation. Last night, after the closet incident, I finally fell asleep around dawn. I dreamed of children playing in my backyard. Abigail, Abby, and Charlie. They were laughing, calling to each other. In the dream, I watched them from my window and they saw me. They waved, gesturing for me to join them. I woke up with my hand on the back doorknob, about to step outside. I don't sleepwalk. I never have. The bell just rang again. just now, as I'm typing this. One single clear chime from the kitchen. I don't know what they want from me. I don't know why they're here. All I know is that I'm not alone, and I never have been, not in this house. The footsteps upstairs have stopped. The house is completely silent now. Wait, someone's whispering my name.